The emergency room doors exploded inward at 1:43 a.m., but it wasn't a gurney that came through first. It was 70 pounds of snarling Belgian Malinois, teeth bared, standing over a dying soldier's body like a demon guarding the gates of hell. Blood pooled beneath the stretcher. Rain hammered against the windows of Mercy Ridge Hospital in Seattle. And when the combat dog locked eyes with the night nurse everyone called too soft for trauma, the entire ER froze. Because somehow, impossibly, that animal recognized her. The same nurse they'd spent months trying to push out. The same woman they whispered wasn't cut out for real medicine. But what nobody knew, what they couldn't have known, was that before Sophia Calloway became the nurse they dismissed, she'd been the combat medic who'd survived missions that didn't exist on any official record. Before we dive in, I need your help. If this story pulls you in, stick with me until the very end, like, comment, and drop your city below so I can see just how far this tale travels. Now, let's begin. The coffee in Sophia Calloway's hand had gone cold 2 hours ago, but she kept holding the cup anyway because it gave her something to do with her hands when the other nurses walked past without speaking. Third night shift this week at Mercy Ridge Hospital, and the pattern hadn't changed. Dr. Patricia Hendricks brushed by without eye contact. Marcus Webb, the charge nurse who'd worked trauma for 15 years, stepped around her like she was furniture. Even the medical students seemed to know she occupied some invisible bottom rung nobody had bothered to explain to her. Sophia dumped the coffee in the break room sink and checked her reflection in the darkened window. 31 years old, blonde hair pulled back tight, scrubs that didn't quite fit right because she'd lost weight since moving to Seattle 6 months ago. She looked exactly like what she was, someone trying very hard to blend into a place that had already decided she didn't belong. Calloway? Hendricks appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, expression flat. Bed 7 needs vitals. Then check on the appendectomy in recovery. I already did vitals 20 minutes ago, Sophia said. He's stable. Then do them again. Hendricks didn't look up from her screen. We follow protocol here. Every time. No shortcuts. The unspoken part hung in the air. Unlike wherever you came from. Sophia nodded and headed for bed 7, passing Marcus at the nurse's station. He was showing a new resident how to read an EKG, his voice patient and warm, the same voice he never used with her. She'd stopped trying to figure out what she'd done wrong. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe she just had one of those faces that reminded people of someone they didn't like. The ER was quiet for a Friday night, a few drunks sleeping it off in observation. An elderly woman with chest pain waiting for cardiology. A teenager who'd sliced his hand open doing something stupid with a pocket knife. Normal. Manageable. The kind of shift where nothing happened and everyone went home tired but unbloodied. Then the radio crackled. Mercy Ridge, this is Medic 7. Inbound with priority trauma. GSW to the chest and abdomen. Patient is military. Repeat, active military. Combat status. ETA 4 minutes. The charge nurse grabbed the radio. Copy Medic 7. Trauma 1 is ready. What's the status on the K9? Static. Then, the what? Dispatch said there's a dog with the patient. Military working dog. Is it secured? Another pause, longer this time. When the paramedic's voice came back, it sounded strained. Negative. The dog he's on the stretcher. Won't let us near the patient. We need animal control on standby. Hendricks swore under her breath and grabbed the phone, barking orders to security. Within 60 seconds, the ER transformed into controlled chaos. Trauma team assembling, equipment prepped, a surgical resident running in from upstairs still pulling on gloves. Sophia stayed at the periphery, waiting for instructions that probably wouldn't come. This was the kind of case the senior staff handled. High profile. Complicated. The exact opposite of vitals checks and appendectomy recovery. The ambulance screamed up to the bay doors. What happened next would replay in Sophia's memory for years, every detail sharp enough to cut. The doors burst open and 2 paramedics rushed in, but they weren't controlling the stretcher. They were flanking it, hands raised like they were approaching something explosive. On the gurney lay a man in tactical gear, blood soaking through the straps holding him down. And standing over him, teeth bared, ears flat against his skull, was the most terrifying animal Sophia had ever seen. The Belgian Malinois was massive, easily 70 pounds of muscle and scarring. His coat was mottled with old wounds, and his eyes, tracked every person in the room with predatory precision. A low growl rumbled from his chest, the kind of sound that bypassed rational thought and went straight to primal fear. "Jesus Christ," Marcus muttered. "Get that thing out of here." "Can't." One of the paramedics kept his distance, voice tight. "He lunged at us twice already, nearly took Thompson's arm off. The patient, his name's Commander Jackson Reed, he coded once in transit. Dog went berserk. We couldn't get close enough to continue compressions." Hendricks moved forward, professional mask firmly in place. "Security's on the way with tranquilizers. We'll sedate the animal and—" The dog's growl deepened into something that barely sounded canine. His lips pulled back further, exposing teeth designed to tear through flesh and bone. "Don't!" Sophia heard her own voice before she decided to speak. "Don't sedate him." Every head turned toward her. Hendricks' expression went from surprise to irritation in half a second. "Excuse me? If you sedate him now, while his handler's dying, he'll panic. He's protecting Reed because that's what he's trained to do. If you take that away—" Sophia stopped, realizing how insane she sounded. "He won't trust anyone here. You'll never get him away from the patient." "And you know this how?" Marcus's tone carried an edge Sophia hadn't heard before. "You a dog trainer now?" The Belgian Malinois shifted on the stretcher, massive paws finding purchase on either side of Reed's body. His eyes swept the room again, and for just a second, one impossible, heart-stopping second, they locked on Sophia. The dog froze. So did she. Because there was recognition in that animal's eyes. Not the general awareness of another human presence, but specific, targeted recognition. He knew her. Somehow, from somewhere, this combat dog knew exactly who she was. The moment shattered when Dr. Raymond Pierce burst into the trauma bay, the ER director whose reputation preceded him like a weather system. 50-something, silver hair, the kind of face that looked good on hospital marketing materials. He took in the scene with one sweep and his jaw tightened. "What the hell is this?" "Military trauma," Hendricks said. "GSW patient critical, but there's a—" "I can see the dog." Pierce's voice could have frozen nitrogen. "Where's animal control?" 5 minutes out." "We don't have 5 minutes. That patient needs surgery now." He turned to Marcus. "Get the tranquilizer gun from security storage. We'll drop the animal and move the patient." "No." Sophia spoke again, louder this time, and immediately regretted it when Pierce's attention swung toward her like a spotlight. "Who are you?" "Sophia Calloway. I'm the new night nurse." Pierce's eyes narrowed. "The one who transferred from, where was it, Portland? Eugene?" "Portland. Right." He said it like she'd just confirmed something he'd suspected. "Here's what you're going to do, Calloway. You're going to step out of this trauma bay and let the experienced staff handle the critical case." The dismissal was so casual, it took Sophia a second to process it. Around them, the other nurses and residents shifted uncomfortably, but nobody spoke up. Nobody ever did. "That dog knows me," Sophia said quietly. "I don't know how, but he does. If you tranquilize him, that's enough." Pierce moved closer, voice dropping to a register meant only for her. "You've been here 6 months, and you've been a problem for 5.5 of them, questioning procedures, arguing with senior staff. Now you're disrupting a trauma response with some fantasy about a dog recognizing you." He gestured toward the exit. "Out, now, or I'll have security escort you out." The Belgian Malinois growled again, but this time it was different, sharper, more focused. His eyes hadn't left Sophia. Her hands were shaking. She forced them still and met Pierce's glare. "That patient has maybe 10 minutes before he bleeds out. The dog won't let you touch him, but I think—" "Security!" Pierce didn't even let her finish. "Get this nurse out of my trauma bay." 2 guards appeared in the doorway, looking uncertain but moving forward anyway. The Belgian Malinois tracked their approach, body coiling like a spring. Sophia felt something crack open inside her chest. Not quite anger, not quite fear, but something worse. The feeling of being invisible even when she was screaming. The exhaustion of fighting to be heard when nobody was listening. She turned toward the exit, shoulders tight, eyes burning with humiliation she refused to let show. That's when Commander Jackson Reed's vitals flatlined. The monitor's shriek cut through everything: conversation, tension, even the dog's growling. The trauma team surged forward instinctively, but the Belgian Malinois launched himself between them and the stretcher, snapping at anyone who got within 3 feet. God damn it! Hendricks grabbed the crash cart. We can't do compressions with that animal in the way. Pierce snatched the tranquilizer gun from the security guard's hands and raised it toward the dog. The animal's eyes fixed on the weapon. His growl turned into something primal and terrifying, the sound of a creature that had killed before and would do it again without hesitation. Time crystallized. Sophia saw it unfold in slow motion, Pierce's finger tightening on the trigger, the dog coiling to attack, Marcus reaching for a sedative, Hendricks frozen with the defibrillator paddles, and behind all of it, Jackson Reed dying on a stretcher because the room was too busy fighting itself to save him. She moved without thinking, pushed past security, past the shocked residents, and yanked up her left sleeve in one sharp motion. The tattoo was faded now, worn by time and deliberately neglected, but still clear enough to read if you knew what you were looking for. Not the standard military insignia. Something else. A coiled snake over crossed medical caduceus, wrapped in chain-link fence wire. Below it, a single word in military stencil font, VIPER. The Belgian Malinois saw it and went completely still. Not calm, still ready to attack, but frozen in recognition so profound it looked like he'd seen a ghost. Sophia kept her arm raised and her voice low. Stand down, soldier. The dog's ears came forward, his growling stopped. The entire trauma bay held its breath. That's a good boy. Sophia took one careful step closer to the stretcher. You've done your job. You protected him. Now, let us help. The Belgian Malinois watched her with eyes that had seen too much violence, too much blood. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then the dog dropped his head and stepped back from Jackson Reed's body. The trauma team erupted into motion. Hendricks started compressions while Marcus prepped the defibrillator. A resident got IV access. Another checked the gunshot wounds. The organized chaos of emergency medicine took over, everyone moving with practiced precision now that the animal was no longer a threat. What did it? But Sophia couldn't move, couldn't look away from the dog, who was now sitting beside the stretcher, still watching her with that impossible recognition in his eyes. Pierce stared at her like she'd just performed a magic trick he couldn't explain. What the hell was that? His voice had lost its authority, replaced by something closer to confusion. Sophia didn't answer. She was too busy calculating exactly how badly she'd just screwed herself. The tattoo was visible now. The call sign, the one that should have been buried with a dozen other classified operations, was exposed under fluorescent hospital lights for anyone to see. Before Pierce could push the question, before anyone could demand an explanation, the ER's main doors slammed open for the second time in 5 minutes. This time, it wasn't paramedics. 4 men in black tactical gear moved through the entrance with the kind of synchronized precision that only came from serious training. No badges visible. No identification, just body armor, weapons holstered but obvious, and the kind of cold professional demeanor that made everyone in the ER instinctively step back. The lead operative swept the room, his gaze landing on Jackson Reed's stretcher, then the dog, then, finally, on Sophia. His eyes widened fractionally. Calloway? She felt her stomach drop through the floor. Major. Her voice came out steady despite everything. I didn't know you were still active. I wasn't supposed to be. The man, Major Dylan Cross, though she'd known him by a different name years ago, moved closer, ignoring Pierce's sputtered protests about unauthorized personnel. What the hell are you doing here? Working. As a civilian nurse? I am a civilian nurse. Cross looked at the tattoo on her arm, then at the Belgian Malinois, who was now pressed against Sophia's leg like he'd found his handler, and something shifted in his expression. Jesus, you're telling me you've been in Seattle this whole time? 6 months and nobody knew? Nobody needed to know. Well, they need to know now. Cross gestured to his team. Lock down this ER. Nobody in or out without clearance, medical staff only, and even then I want IDs verified. Pierce finally found his voice. You can't just commandeer my hospital. Actually, Major, we can. A woman's voice, sharp and authoritative, cut through the tension. Another operative stepped forward, pulling out federal credentials that made Pierce go pale. Defense Intelligence Agency. This facility is now under federal jurisdiction until further notice. Anyone who interferes will be detained. The ER descended into controlled pandemonium. Hospital security scrambled to comply with the lockdown orders. Nurses whispered urgently to each other. Hendricks kept working on Reed, but her eyes kept darting toward Sophia with questions she couldn't ask. Cross pulled Sophia aside, his hand on her arm firm enough to make it clear this wasn't optional. Talk, fast. How did you calm that dog? He knew me. From where? Sophia hesitated, glancing at the Belgian Malinois. The dog hadn't left her side, hadn't stopped watching her with those intelligent, scarred eyes. How many K9s survived the Istanbul extraction? Cross's face went blank. That's classified. Everything about Istanbul is classified. The op doesn't exist. None of us exist. So how the hell did Reed end up shot in Seattle with a Viper dog protecting him? That's what we're trying to figure out. Cross lowered his voice. Reed was investigating something. Weapons trafficking, we think, but he went dark 3 days ago. We found him 2 hours ago in an industrial district with 4 rounds in him and the dog standing guard. Whoever shot him is still out there. The implications crashed over Sophia like ice water. You think it's connected to the old operations? I don't know. But if it is, and if someone knows you're here, Cross didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Across the trauma bay, Hendricks called out, "We've got him stabilized. Pressure's holding. He needs surgery, but he's alive." Relief flickered across Cross's face for just a second before the mask snapped back into place. Good. Get him prepped. I want a full security detail in that OR. Pierce pushed forward, frustration and confusion warring on his face. Someone want to tell me what's happening in my hospital? Who is this patient? Who are you people? And why does my night nurse apparently have a classified military tattoo? Cross ignored him, focusing on Sophia. We need to debrief you. Everything you remember about Viper, everyone you worked with, any connection that might explain why Reed ended up here. I don't know anything. Sophia kept her voice level, even as panic crept up her spine. I left that life 5 years ago. I've been civilian ever since. Clearly, someone disagrees. Cross gestured to the dog. That animal is Axel. He was Reed's partner for 3 years, and before that he was trained by the same handler who ran the K9 program in Istanbul, the handler you worked with, the one who... He stopped himself, but Sophia finished the thought in her head. The one who died in the explosion that ended Viper. Axel pressed closer against her leg, and she realized her hands were shaking again. This time she didn't bother hiding it. The ER doors opened once more, and this time everyone tensed. But it was just a hospital administrator, some assistant director Sophia had never met, looking pale and overwhelmed as he approached Pierce. We've got a problem, the administrator said. The media picked up the federal presence, news vans are setting up outside. They're asking about a shooting, military involvement, some kind of classified operation. Shut it down, Pierce's voice was steel. No statements, no information. Hospital counsel handles all press inquiries. But Sophia could see the calculation in his eyes. This wasn't going away. Whatever had brought Jackson Reed to this ER with 4 bullets and a combat dog, it was about to explode into something nobody could contain. Cross's radio crackled. Major, we've got a situation at the north entrance. 2 unmarked vehicles just pulled up. No plates. Occupants are armed and requesting entry. Requesting or demanding? Demanding, sir. They're claiming federal authority, but their credentials aren't scanning right. Sophia felt her blood go cold. That's not your backup. No. Cross's hand went to his sidearm. It's not. The lights in the ER flickered once, twice, then died completely. Emergency generators kicked in after 3 seconds of darkness, bathing everything in harsh red backup lighting. Alarms started wailing throughout the hospital. Fire suppression systems, security alerts, patient monitors all screaming at once. Cross grabbed his radio. Report! What the hell just happened? Static. Then a voice, tight with tension. Sir, we've lost all external comms. Building's perimeter has been breached at multiple points. Armed hostiles moving through the lower levels. This isn't a blackout. Someone cut the power deliberately. Pierce went white. That's impossible. We have redundant systems. They cut those too. Cross was already moving, pulling Sophia with him. Get Reed to the OR now. Everyone else, secure positions. This is an active threat situation. Hendricks stared at the chaos around her, then at Sophia, and understanding finally dawned in her eyes. You knew this would happen. That's why you didn't want the dog sedated. That's why you... Gunfire erupted somewhere below them. Not the sharp cracks of handguns, but the heavier thump of tactical rifles. People screamed. More alarms joined the cacophony. Axel growled, a sound that vibrated through the floor, and pressed against Sophia hard enough to make her stumble. Cross pulled her behind the nurse's station as his team took defensive positions around the trauma bay. Stay down. Don't move until I... Major... The female DIA operative's voice cut through. We've got a problem. Building schematics show the OR is 2 floors up, but the elevators are locked down and the stairwells... She paused, listening to her earpiece. Stairwells are compromised. Hostiles control all the main routes. Then we hold here. Cross chambered around. Turn this trauma bay into a fortress until backup arrives. What backup? Pierce's voice had gone shrill. You locked down my hospital. Who's coming? Nobody answered him because nobody had an answer. Sophia knelt beside Axel, her hands buried in his scarred fur, and tried to calculate odds that kept getting worse. Jackson Reed was stable, but needed surgery. The ER was under siege by an unknown force. Federal agents were surrounded. And somewhere in this building were armed operatives who wanted Reed dead badly enough to assault a hospital. She looked down at the tattoo on her arm, faded and half forgotten, and felt the weight of every decision she'd made to leave that life behind. The trauma bay doors shook as something heavy hit them from outside. Cross aimed his weapon at the entrance. Whatever comes through that door, we don't let it reach the patient. Clear? His team responded with silent nods. Professional, controlled, ready. The doors shook again, harder this time. Metal groaned. Sophia felt Axel's muscles coil beneath her hands, the dog preparing to defend his handler one more time. She thought about Pierce's dismissal, about the months of being ignored and underestimated, about how nobody in this hospital had ever bothered to ask what she'd done before becoming a civilian nurse. The doors buckled, and Sophia Calloway, the woman they'd called too soft for trauma, pulled up her sleeves and prepared for the kind of violence she'd promised herself she'd never face again. The doors exploded inward with a metallic shriek that drowned out the alarms. 3 men in black tactical gear poured through the opening, rifles raised, moving with the kind of precision that came from serious money and serious training. They weren't military, Sophia could tell that in the first half-second, but they were close enough to pass in the chaos. Cross fired twice before they'd fully entered. The lead operative dropped, his weapon clattering across blood-slicked tile. The other 2 scattered, using overturned equipment as cover, while return fire punched through medical cabinets and shattered monitors. Axel launched himself at the nearest gunman with terrifying speed. 70 pounds of scarred muscle and trained aggression hit the man's center mass, driving him into the wall hard enough to crack plaster. The rifle discharged into the ceiling. The man screamed. Sophia pressed herself against the nurse's station, hands covering her ears as the trauma bay transformed into a war zone. Hendricks had dragged Reed's stretcher behind the crash cart, trying to shield her patient with her own body. Marcus crouched near the supply closet, face white with shock. Pierce had disappeared entirely, probably running for his office the second the shooting started. Cross's team returned fire in controlled bursts, forcing the remaining attacker back through the doorway. The DIA operative, the woman whose name Sophia still didn't know, moved with lethal efficiency, flanking left while her partner covered right. Military training, Sophia thought. Recent deployment, the kind of muscle memory that only came from combat. The gunfire stopped as abruptly as it started. Axel stood over the man he'd brought down, teeth buried in the operative's shoulder, growling in a register that barely sounded animal. The man wasn't moving. Might never move again. Cross-checked the doorway, weapon raised, then glanced back at Sophia. You hit? She shook her head, not trusting her voice. Anyone hit. Hendricks straightened slowly, checking Reed's monitors. Patient stable. IV's intact, but we need to move him. Now. He can't survive surgery in these conditions. Surgery's not happening. Cross reloaded with practiced speed. Not until we secure this building. He'll die, Hendricks shot back. Those bullets are still in him. He's bleeding internally. I've bought us maybe 2 hours, but after that won't matter if we're all dead. Cross turned to his team. Stevens? Sit rep. How many hostiles are we looking at? The male operative pressed his earpiece, listening to something Sophia couldn't hear. Unknown. Comms are still jammed. Best guess based on the breach pattern? 8 to 12 operators, professional grade equipment. Whoever's funding this operation isn't playing around. 8 to 12. Against 4 federal agents, a handful of medical staff, and 1 combat dog. The math wasn't complicated. Sophia found her voice. They're here for Reed. Obviously, Cross said. No, I mean they're only here for Reed. Everyone else is just in the way. She stood, legs shaking but holding. If we move him, they'll follow. Keep him static, and this whole floor becomes a kill box. Marcus stared at her like she'd started speaking another language. What the hell are you talking about? She's right. The DIA woman, Stevens had called her Morrison, checked her weapons chamber. They hit hard and fast because they knew we'd locked down the ER. They're trying to overwhelm us before backup arrives. What backup? Hendrick's voice cracked. You said comms are down. Local comms, but we triggered a federal distress beacon when the power cut. Help is coming. Question is whether we can hold out long enough for it to arrive. Another sound echoed from the corridor, boots on tile, multiple sets, moving with purpose. Not running, not rushing. Just advancing steadily toward the trauma bay like they had all the time in the world. Because they did, Sophia realized. The hospital was locked down. Police couldn't get in. Backup was delayed. And somewhere in this building, someone was coordinating an assault with military precision against a handful of defenders who were running low on ammunition and options. Cross positioned his team at the destroyed doorway. Morrison, take the left sight line. Stevens, right. I'll hold center. Anything that moves, you drop it. Major, Morrison's voice carried an edge. We're exposed here. That doorway's a fatal funnel. They'll pin us down and flank through the side corridors. You got a better plan? Yeah, we collapse the defense perimeter, pull back to the OR prep room, seal the doors, and fort up until the cavalry arrives. That leaves Reed completely vulnerable. Reed's vulnerable now. Morrison gestured to the shattered trauma bay. At least in the prep room, we've got 1 entrance to defend instead of 3. Cross hesitated, and Sophia saw the calculation playing out behind his eyes. Military tactics versus medical necessity. Defensive position versus patient survival. The kind of impossible choice that didn't have a right answer. Hendricks made the decision for him. I'll move him. Marcus, help me with the stretcher. Marcus didn't move. His hands were shaking so badly he couldn't grip anything. I can't do this. This isn't... We're nurses, not soldiers. Then get the hell out of the way. Hendricks grabbed the stretcher herself, but Reed's dead weight and the IV lines made it impossible to maneuver alone. She looked at Sophia. Help me. Sophia moved without thinking, muscle memory from a different life taking over. She grabbed the rear of the stretcher while Hendricks took the front, and together they maneuvered Reed toward the back corridor. Axel followed immediately, staying close enough that his shoulder brushed Sophia's leg with every step. The boots in the corridor were getting louder. Cross swore under his breath and pulled his team back. Morrison, cover the retreat. Stevens, you're on rear guard. Nobody gets through. They moved in synchronized chaos, federal agents providing suppressing fire, while medical staff pushed a dying man through a hospital hallway lit only by emergency lighting. Every shadow could hide an attacker. Every corner could be an ambush point. The OR prep room was 20 yards away when the side corridor erupted with gunfire. Stevens went down first, taking 2 rounds to the chest that his body armor barely stopped. He hit the floor gasping, wind knocked out of him, weapons skittering away. Morrison returned fire blindly, forcing the attackers back while Cross grabbed Stevens by his tactical vest and dragged him toward cover. Sophia and Hendricks kept moving, had to keep moving. Reed's monitors were shrieking warnings, blood pressure dropping, heart rate climbing into dangerous territory. The man was dying in real time, and they were hauling him through a firefight like cargo. Another attacker appeared at the far end of the hallway, rifle raised, and Sophia saw the moment his eyes locked onto the stretcher. Time crystallized again. She saw his finger tightening on the trigger, saw the barrel aligning with Reed's head, saw Hendricks frozen in horror because there was nowhere to go, no cover to take, just an exposed hallway and a patient who couldn't survive another bullet. Axel moved faster than anything that size should have been able to move. The dog launched himself past the stretcher in a blur of fur and teeth, covering 15 feet in less than 2 seconds. He hit the gunman high, jaws closing around the man's weapon arm, and the rifle discharged into the ceiling as both bodies crashed to the floor. Cross put 3 rounds into the attacker's center mass while he was down. They reached the prep room and slammed the door behind them. Morrison shoved a supply cabinet against it while Stevens, still wheezing from the chest impacts, wedged a crash cart under the handle. It wouldn't hold long, but it might buy them minutes. Hendricks immediately went to work on Reed, checking his vitals, adjusting IV drips, doing everything she could with the limited equipment in the small room. He's crashing. I need blood. Oh, negative. At least 4 units. Blood bank's 3 floors down, Morrison said. We're not getting there. Then he dies. A lot of people are going to die tonight. Cross reloaded his weapon with hands that had stopped shaking years ago. Question is whether we can keep that number from including everyone in this room. Sophia sank against the wall, adrenaline finally catching up with her. Her hands were covered in blood, Reed's blood, maybe some of her own from where she'd scraped them on the stretcher. Axel pressed against her legs again, his scarred face turned up toward hers, and she realized the dog was trembling. Not from fear, from exhaustion, from wounds that should have killed him years ago catching up in the worst possible moment. She ran her hands through his fur and felt the ridges of scar tissue beneath, shrapnel wounds, burn marks, the evidence of a violence that had shaped this animal into something barely domesticated. Istanbul, she said quietly. You were there, weren't you? Axel's ears came forward. I remember now. You were the patrol dog, the one who found the explosives before they detonated. Her voice caught. You saved 12 people that night. Saved me. Cross glanced over, surprise flickering across his face. I didn't know you were in Istanbul. Nobody knew, that was the point. Sophia kept her focus on the dog. I was attached to Viper for 6 months as a combat medic, embedded with the K9 unit because someone decided we needed medical personnel who could handle the dogs if their handlers went down. And did they? 2 of them, Lieutenant Marks and Sergeant Rosewood. IED took out their vehicle during an extraction. I kept the dogs alive long enough to get them back to base. She paused. Marks didn't make it. Rosewood lost both legs. The program shut down 3 months later after someone leaked operational details and got half the team killed. Morrison was watching her with new interest. You're the medic from the leaked op? The one they said disappeared? I didn't disappear, I left. There's a difference. Not to the people looking for you, there isn't. The statement hung in the air like smoke. Sophia felt something cold settle in her chest. What does that mean? Before Morrison could answer, the door shuddered under a massive impact. Then another. Someone was using a battering ram or something close to it, systematically destroying the makeshift barricade. Stevens struggled to his feet, still wincing from the chest impacts. Major, we can't hold this position. That door's going to give in the next 60 seconds. Then we make every second count. Cross checked his ammunition. 3 magazines left. Morrison? 2.5. Stevens? I lost my primary during the breach. Pistol only, 1 magazine. The math was getting worse by the minute. Even if backup arrived in the next 10 minutes, they'd be out of ammunition and options long before then. Sophia looked at Reed's pale face, at Hendricks working frantically to keep him alive, at the federal agents preparing for a last stand they probably wouldn't survive. She thought about the tattoo on her arm, about the call sign she'd left behind, about the promise she'd made to herself that she'd never be that person again. The door shuddered again. Wood began to splinter. She stood up. There's another way out. Cross didn't look away from the door. We checked. This room has 1 entrance. Not for patients. Sophia moved to the back wall, running her hands along what looked like solid panels. For bodies. Every prep room connects to the morgue transport system. Old hospital design. They didn't want to move corpses through public hallways. Morrison's eyes widened. You're saying there's a hidden passage? I'm saying there's a service corridor that runs behind these walls. It's tight and it's dark and it hasn't been used in years, but it connects to the loading docks in the basement. And you know this how? Because I spent my first week here learning every exit route in this building. Sophia found the seam she was looking for and pressed hard. A panel clicked and swung inward, revealing a narrow passage that smelled of dust and decay. Habit from the old job. Always know how to get out. Cross stared at the opening, then at her. Something shifted in his expression, not quite respect, but close. Can we move the stretcher through there? If we're careful. The door finally gave way with a crack like breaking bones. The supply cabinet toppled. The crash cart went flying. Go! Cross grabbed Hendricks and physically shoved her toward the passage. Morrison, take point. Stevens, help with the patient. Move. They moved in controlled panic, abandoning the prep room seconds before armed operatives poured through the destroyed doorway. Morrison squeezed into the passage first, weapon raised, clearing the darkness ahead. Sophia and Hendricks maneuvered Reed's stretcher through the opening at an angle that made every second feel like an eternity. Axel followed without hesitation, his body pressed low as he navigated the tight space. Stevens came last, turning to provide cover fire as Cross sealed the panel behind them. Gunfire erupted in the prep room they'd just abandoned. Voices shouted in frustration. Someone swore viciously, then silence as the panel locked into place. The service corridor was pitch black except for the red emergency lights bleeding through ventilation grates. The air was stale and thick with decades of accumulated dust. The stretcher's wheels scraped against concrete as they pushed forward, the sound impossibly loud in the confined space. Morrison whispered back, "How far to the loading dock?" "Quarter mile," Sophia said. "Maybe less. But the corridor drops 2 floors, and there's a section that's partially collapsed. We'll have to carry the stretcher." Hendricks checked Reed's monitors by the faint glow of the screen. "He's not going to make it. His pressure's dropping too fast. I need to get him to an OR in the next 30 minutes or nothing." Cross's voice was flat. "We keep moving or we die here. Those are the options." They moved in silence, broken only by their breathing and the scrape of the stretcher. Sophia led the way with Morrison, navigating by memory and the occasional emergency light. Behind her, she could hear Stevens struggling with the rear of the stretcher, his breathing still labored from the chest impacts. The corridor began to slope downward. The temperature dropped. Somewhere in the darkness, water dripped with steady rhythm. Axel growled softly. Sophia froze. "What is it?" The dog's body had gone rigid, every muscle tensed. His ears were flat against his skull, and his attention was locked on something ahead that she couldn't see. Morrison raised her weapon. "I've got movement, 20 meters forward, multiple contacts." "That's impossible," Sophia said. "Nobody knows about this corridor." "Apparently somebody does." Flashlight beams cut through the darkness ahead, swinging back and forth in search patterns. At least 3 lights. Maybe more. And behind them, voices speaking in clipped professional tones that carried too well in the confined space. They were trapped. Hostiles ahead. Hostiles behind. And a dying man on a stretcher that made stealth impossible. Cross pulled Sophia back. "Is there another route? Any other way to the loading dock?" She ran through the mental map she'd built during those first paranoid weeks. "There's a maintenance shaft about 50 feet back. Leads to the mechanical room. From there we could access the main building, but we'd be completely exposed," Morrison finished. "Out in the open with no cover and a patient who can't move. Better than being pinned in a corridor with no room to maneuver." The flashlights were getting closer. Sophia could hear boots on concrete now, moving with purpose. Stevens pulled a grenade from his tactical vest. "I can buy us time. Fall back to that maintenance shaft and I'll—" "No!" Cross grabbed his arm. "You use that in here and you'll bring the ceiling down on all of us." "Then what do you suggest, Major?" Before Cross could answer, Reed's monitor started screaming. Not the steady beep of declining vitals, but the long, flat tone that meant only one thing. Hendricks grabbed the defibrillator. "He's coding. I need to shock him now." "You charge that thing and they'll hear us," Morrison hissed. "I don't care. He's dying. We're all dying." "Enough." Sophia pushed between them, her voice low but carrying authority she didn't know she still had. "Hendricks, do your job. Keep him alive. Morrison, cover the rear approach. Cross, Stevens. You're with me." Cross stared at her. "What are you, saving your asses?" She turned to Axel. "With me, soldier. Time to work." The dog moved to her side immediately, falling into a heel position that was pure military training. Sophia started walking toward the flashlights. "Calloway, get back here!" Cross's whisper was urgent, but she ignored it. She kept moving forward, hands raised, Axel at her side, stepping into the beam of the nearest flashlight like she'd done this 100 times before. Because she had. Different country, different war, but the principle was the same. The flashlights converged on her face, blinding bright, weapons raised. At least 4 operators in tactical gear, their faces covered by masks that made them look more machine than human. "Don't shoot." Sophia kept her voice steady. I'm unarmed. I'm a nurse. I just want to talk. One of the operators moved closer, weapon still raised. Where's Reed? Close, but you're not getting to him. We'll see about that. No, Sophia said. You won't, because I'm going to make you an offer. The operator tilted his head slightly. What kind of offer? The kind where some of you walk out of here alive. She gestured to Axel. You know what this dog is. You know what he's trained to do. And you know that in this corridor, with these tight quarters, he'll take down at least 2 of you before you kill him. We'll take that trade. Will you? Sophia took one step closer. Because behind me are 4 federal agents with nothing to lose and a patient they'll die protecting. You come at us, you're starting a fight in a confined space where nobody wins. Bullets will ricochet. Bodies will pile up. And even if you get through us, you think backup isn't coming? You think this entire assault hasn't been broadcast to every federal agency in the region? The operator studied her for a long moment. She couldn't see his face behind the mask, but she could feel the calculation happening. Who are you? Nobody important. Just a nurse caught in the wrong place. Bullshit. He moved closer still, close enough that she could smell gunpowder and sweat. You've got viper ink on your arm. You handle that dog like a trained operator, and you're standing here negotiating like someone who knows exactly what she's doing. Sophia felt her heart hammering, but kept her expression neutral. Then you know I'm not bluffing. Behind her, she heard the muffled thump of defibrillator pads, heard Hendricks counting compressions, heard the faint electronic whine of charging capacitors. The operator's attention flickered toward the sound. That's when Sophia moved. She dropped low and to the left, yanking Axel with her, as gunfire erupted in the space she'd just occupied. The muzzle flash lit up the corridor like lightning. Concrete exploded where her head had been. But Cross and Stevens had used those precious seconds to get into position. They opened fire from behind the stretcher, controlled bursts that filled the corridor with deafening thunder. Morrison joined from the rear, catching the operators in a crossfire they hadn't anticipated. 2 went down immediately. A third stumbled back, weapon clattering away. The fourth, the one who'd talked to Sophia, took cover behind a support pillar and returned fire with professional accuracy that forced everyone back. Sophia pressed herself against the wall, ears ringing, hands over her head as bullets carved through the darkness. Axel was beside her, trembling but holding position, waiting for a command she didn't know how to give. The gunfire stopped as abruptly as it started. Silence crashed down like a physical weight. Sophia's hearing was muffled, cotton-stuffed. She could taste cordite and dust. Cross moved forward cautiously, weapon raised, checking the bodies. Clear. 3 down. 1 got away. Which means he's reporting our position. Morrison helped Stevens to his feet. We've got maybe 2 minutes before this corridor is flooded with hostiles. Hendrick's voice cut through, shaking but determined. I've got him back, sinus rhythm. But he's barely holding on. They kept moving, faster now, abandoning caution for speed. The maintenance shaft was exactly where Sophia remembered, a vertical tube barely wide enough for 1 person, with ladder rungs welded to the side that looked corroded and unstable. Morrison peered down the shaft. This goes straight down 50 feet. How are we getting the stretcher through? We're not. Cross started stripping equipment off the stretcher. We carry him. Stevens shook his head. That shaft won't hold 2 people. Rungs look like they'll snap under 1 person's weight. Then we make multiple trips. There's no time. They were all looking at each other with the kind of desperate calculation that came right before impossible decisions. Someone would have to stay behind to lower Reed down the shaft. Someone would have to go first to receive him at the bottom. And someone would have to provide cover when the hostiles inevitably found them. Sophia looked at the shaft, at Reed's unconscious body, at the federal agents arguing about physics and time. Then she looked at Axel. The dog was watching her with those intelligent eyes, waiting, always waiting for someone to tell him what his purpose was. I'll take Reed down, she said. Morrison goes first to catch him. Stevens, you and Cross provide cover. Once we're down, you follow. That leaves you exposed if they find us, Cross said. Everything leaves someone exposed. At least this way Reed has a chance. Nobody had a better plan. Morrison dropped into the shaft first, descending rapidly despite the corroded rungs. She called up after 20 seconds. I'm down. Send him. Getting Reed into the shaft was a nightmare of physics and improvisation. They had to maneuver his unconscious body vertical, support his head and injured torso, keep the IV lines from tangling. Hendricks worked frantically to disconnect monitors and stabilize him for the descent. Sophia took most of his weight, bracing herself at the shaft's edge, while Cross and Stevens lowered from above. Reed was dead weight. Literally might be dead weight soon if they didn't move faster, and her arms were screaming within seconds. She descended one agonizing rung at a time, Reed's body pressed against hers, blood soaking into her scrubs. The shaft was so narrow she could barely move. Every rung felt like it might give way. Above her, Axel whined softly, confused about why he couldn't follow. Halfway down, she heard voices echoing from the corridor above. "Major, we've got company!" Stevens' shout was muted by the shaft, but urgent enough to make Sophia's blood freeze. Gunfire erupted, concrete dust rained down from above. "Keep moving!" Cross's voice. "Don't stop!" Sophia kept descending, arms burning, legs shaking, Reed's weight threatening to pull them both into freefall. The rungs were slick with something she didn't want to identify. Her grip kept slipping. Morrison called up, 10 more feet! The shaft filled with the thunder of gunfire above. She heard Axel barking, not growling, but the sharp alert bark that meant threat, threat, threat. Heard Stevens shouting something she couldn't make out. Heard Cross returning fire in controlled bursts. 5 more feet. Her hand closed around a rung that wasn't there. She dropped 6 inches before her other hand caught, jarring her entire body. Reed slipped. She grabbed him desperately, fingers tangling in his tactical vest, barely keeping them both from falling. Morrison reached up and grabbed Reed's legs. "I've got him! Let go!" Sophia released her grip and dropped the final 3 feet, landing hard enough to buckle her knees. Morrison was already dragging Reed away from the shaft, checking his vitals by flashlight while Sophia gasped for air she couldn't seem to find. Above them, the gunfire had stopped. Not tapered off, just stopped completely. That was worse somehow. "Cross him!" Morrison called up the shaft. "Stevens, report!" Silence. Then a single bark echoed down the shaft. Axel's voice, sharp with distress. "Major, if you can hear me, we're moving to the loading dock." Morrison grabbed Sophia's arm. "We can't wait. Help me with Reed." "But they're buying us time. Don't waste it." They dragged Reed through a mechanical room filled with ancient pipes and electrical panels humming with dangerous energy. The loading dock was supposed to be another 100 yards through a service tunnel. Sophia's arms felt like rubber. Her legs were threatening to give out completely. Reed's eyes fluttered open. For just a second, he focused on Sophia's face, and something like recognition flickered there. "Viper," he whispered. "You're the medic. Save your strength." "They know." His hand grabbed her wrist with surprising force. "Pierce, he's working with them. Has been from the start. That's why they knew." His eyes rolled back. The grip loosened. Morrison checked his pulse. Still with us. Barely. "Pierce?" Sophia's mind was racing. "The ER director?" "Makes sense. How else would they know our exact position? How else would they coordinate a hospital assault this precise?" Morrison kept moving, dragging Reed's stretcher through the tunnel. Someone on the inside feeding them information in real time. The loading dock access was blocked by a security door that required a keycard. Morrison pulled out some kind of electronic override device, but her hands were shaking badly enough that she kept dropping it. Sophia took it from her. "Let me." She'd used these devices before. Different lifetime, different continent, but the principle was the same. 10 seconds, and the lock clicked open. The loading dock was exactly as abandoned as she'd hoped. Concrete bay, rusted rolling doors, a single flickering light that barely penetrated the darkness. Rain hammered down outside, visible through gaps in the doors. And standing in the shadows near the emergency exit was Dr. Raymond Pierce, a cell phone pressed to his ear. He looked up as they entered. His eyes widened. The phone dropped from his hand. "You're supposed to be dead," he said. Morrison raised her weapon. "Don't move." But Pierce was already moving, backing toward the exit, hands raised but expression calculating rather than afraid. "You don't understand what you've stumbled into. This is bigger than one patient, bigger than this hospital." "I don't care how big it is," Morrison's voice was steel. "Get on the ground now." "I can't do that." "Then I put you down." Pierce smiled, actually smiled, and that's when Sophia saw the explosive vest strapped beneath his shirt. The detonator was in his right hand, thumb hovering over the trigger. "Here's what's going to happen," Pierce said calmly. "You're going to put down that weapon and step away from Commander Reed. Then you're going to walk out that door and forget everything you saw tonight, or I detonate this vest and we all die in the rubble." Morrison didn't lower her weapon. "You're bluffing, am I?" Pierce pulled his shirt open, revealing the vest in detail. Professional grade, military spec. Enough explosive to collapse half the basement. "I've got nothing to lose. They already put a termination order on me. Too much exposure, too many loose ends, so either I deliver Reed's body and buy my way back in, or I take everyone with me." Sophia felt the world narrowing to this single moment. Pierce with his finger on a literal trigger, Morrison with a weapon that wouldn't matter if those explosives detonated, and Reed bleeding out on a stretcher between them. The rain hammered louder. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed. Pierce's thumb pressed down fractionally. "Last chance, walk away or—" The rolling door behind him exploded inward as a black SUV crashed through it at 40 miles per hour. Pierce didn't even have time to scream. The SUV hit him doing 40, crushing him against the loading dock wall with a sound like wet concrete breaking. The detonator flew from his hand, spinning through the air in what felt like slow motion before clattering harmlessly across the floor 10 feet away. The vehicle's engine roared once more, then died. Steam hissed from the crumpled hood. The driver's door kicked open and Cross stumbled out, blood running down the side of his face, Axel leaping out behind him. "Vest!" Morrison screamed. "He's got a—" "I know!" Cross was already moving, grabbing the detonator before Pierce's twitching body could reach for it. He ran toward the emergency exit and hurled the device into the rain. It disappeared into darkness. Nobody breathed for 3 seconds. No explosion, just rain hammering on concrete and Pierce's labored breathing as he tried to move limbs that would never work right again. Sophia's legs finally gave out. She sat down hard on the cold floor, hands shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. Morrison was checking Reed's vitals with mechanical efficiency, but her face had gone pale as paper. Cross leaned against the SUV, one hand pressed to his bleeding temple. "Stevens didn't make it. They came through the shaft right after you dropped. He bought us 30 seconds. His voice was flat, empty of everything except exhaustion. "Axel and I took the maintenance elevator. Figured we'd beat you here." "You figured right." Morrison's voice cracked on the last word. Axel walked over to Sophia and pressed his scarred head against her chest. She wrapped her arms around him without thinking, burying her face in his fur, trying to stop the shaking that had taken over her entire body. Pierce coughed wetly. Blood bubbled from his mouth. "Doesn't matter. You're all dead anyway." Cross moved to stand over him. "Who gave the order? Who's running this operation?" "Bigger than you think?" Pierce's eyes were glazing. "Military contracts, offshore accounts. Reed found the shipping manifests. Proof of everything." "What manifests? Where?" But Pierce's eyes had stopped focusing. His breathing turned shallow and irregular. Whatever he knew died with him as his chest stopped moving entirely. Morrison checked for a pulse out of habit, then shook her head. "He's gone." "Good." Cross didn't sound remotely sympathetic. He pulled out his phone, checking for signal. "Still jammed. Whoever's running this operation has serious resources. They're blocking every frequency in a 2-mile radius." The loading dock's emergency exit suddenly burst open. 4 people in tactical gear poured through, but these weren't attackers. Sophia recognized the patches on their shoulders immediately. FBI hostage rescue team. Real federal agents, not the private military contractors who'd been hunting them. The lead agent swept the room with his weapon, then lowered it when he saw Cross. "Major Cross? We got the distress beacon. What's the situation?" "Hostile force inside the hospital. At least 6 operators still active. Unknown number of casualties. We've got 1 critical patient who needs immediate evac and surgical intervention." Cross gestured to Reed. "This is Commander Jackson Reed. Someone tried to assassinate him tonight." The FBI agent spoke into his radio, calling for medical teams and tactical backup. Within 2 minutes, the loading dock transformed into a command center. Agents establishing perimeter security, medics taking over Reed's care for Morrison, someone wrapping a pressure bandage around Cross's head wound. Sophia sat against the wall, still holding Axel, watching it all happen like she was viewing it through glass. Her scrubs were soaked with blood and rain and concrete dust. Her hands had finally stopped shaking, but now they felt numb and distant, like they belonged to someone else. A paramedic crouched beside her. "Ma'am, are you injured?" She shook her head. "You're covered in blood." "Not mine." The paramedic checked her anyway, professional and thorough, while Sophia stared at nothing and tried to process the last 3 hours. Tried to understand how a normal night shift had turned into a war zone. Tried to figure out why Jackson Reed's investigation into weapons trafficking had nearly gotten everyone in this hospital killed. The FBI agent was talking to Cross, voices low but urgent. Sophia caught fragments. Coordinated assault on a civilian facility. Federal crimes. Need a full debrief. Reed was being loaded into an ambulance, still unconscious, vitals stabilized enough for transport. Morrison climbed in with him, weapon still drawn, not taking any chances. The ambulance screamed away into the rain with a full FBI escort. More agents were flooding into the hospital now, clearing rooms, securing the building floor by floor. Gunfire echoed from somewhere upstairs. Brief exchange, then silence. The tactical contractors who'd assaulted the ER were either dead or in custody. The siege was over. Sophia felt like she should be relieved. Instead, she just felt hollow. Cross sat down beside her, holding an ice pack to his head. "You did good tonight." "Stevens is dead." "Stevens was doing his job, same as the rest of us." He paused. "Same as you." "I'm not a federal agent, I'm a nurse." "Tonight you were both." He studied her face. "I need to ask you something. Pierce said Reed found shipping manifests, proof of the trafficking operation. Did Reed say anything to you about where those documents might be?" Sophia tried to remember Reed's whispered words in the tunnel. "He said Pierce was working with them from the start. That's all. Nothing about files, data, physical evidence?" "If he had evidence, he wouldn't have been carrying it during a covert investigation. He would have hidden it somewhere safe." Cross nodded slowly. "That's what we figured. Which means whoever tried to kill him tonight wasn't just eliminating a threat. They were trying to find out where he stashed the proof before he could talk. They failed. This time." Cross stood up, groaning slightly. "But they'll try again. Reed's alive, which means he's still a target. And now so are you." The words took a second to land. "What?" "You saved his life multiple times. You're a witness to everything that happened tonight. And you're former Viper, which means you've got connections to classified operations these people desperately want to keep buried." He offered her a hand up. "You're not safe here anymore." Sophia let him pull her to her feet, legs unsteady. "Where am I supposed to go?" "Protective custody. FBI's already arranged it. You'll be moved to a secure location until we figure out who's behind this and how deep it goes." "I have a job, a life." "You had a life?" Cross's voice wasn't unkind, just honest. "The second that dog recognized you, everything changed. These people don't leave loose ends." Axel pressed against her leg again. She looked down at the scarred Belgian Malinois who'd saved her life at least twice tonight, and something clicked into place. "What happens to him?" "Standard protocol is to return military working dogs to their unit for, He doesn't have a unit anymore. His handler's in surgery. The program he was trained for doesn't officially exist." Sophia felt anger stirring beneath the numbness. "You're going to warehouse him somewhere while bureaucrats decide his fate." Cross didn't deny it. "No." Sophia's voice was flat. "He comes with me." "That's not how it works." "Then change how it works." She met his eyes. "I'm going into protective custody for an investigation I didn't ask to be part of. The least you can do is let me keep the dog who's been protecting me all night." Cross started to argue, then stopped. Something in Sophia's expression made him reconsider. "I'll see what I can do. No promises." The FBI agent approached, holding a tablet. "Major, we've completed the initial sweep. 18 confirmed hostile casualties inside the hospital, 3 additional suspects in custody. We're still processing the scene, but it's definitely a professional operation. Military-grade weapons, encrypted communications, coordinated breach protocols. Any ID on the operators? The EAT. Most had no identification. The ones we're running prints on. They're coming back as former special forces. Contractors working for a security firm called Aegis Solutions Group." Cross's expression went carefully neutral. "Never heard of them." "Most people haven't. They're a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. But according to financial records we're pulling, they've got DoD contracts worth hundreds of millions. Logistics, transport, security for overseas operations. Let me guess, Sophia said quietly. Humanitarian missions. The FBI agent looked at her in surprise. How did you know? Because that's the perfect cover for weapons trafficking. You move relief supplies into conflict zones, but half the cargo is guns and ammunition. You have military authorization, diplomatic immunity, and nobody questions humanitarian shipments. She felt sick saying it out loud. It's not even creative, it's just effective. Cross was staring at her. Reed told you that? Reed didn't have to. I saw it in Istanbul. Crates marked as medical supplies that weighed 3 times what they should. Shipments with security details that looked more like armed convoys. Everyone knew something wasn't right, but the orders came from so high up that asking questions was career suicide. She paused. 2 people who asked questions ended up dead in training accidents. The FBI agent typed rapidly on his tablet. We need a formal statement. Everything you remember about Istanbul, the Viper program, anything that might connect to this operation. She's giving statements after she's been cleared by medical, Cross said, and after she's had about 12 hours of sleep. Major, with all due respect, this is a priority investigation. With all due respect, she just saved a federal witness and survived a terrorist assault on a civilian hospital. She'll give you statements when I say she's ready. Cross's voice carried the kind of authority that ended arguments. Now get her transport to the safe house before someone realizes she's still alive. The agent looked like he wanted to protest, but thought better of it. He walked away, already speaking into his radio. Sophia felt exhaustion crashing over her in waves. I need to call my supervisor. Tell them I'm not coming back to work. Already handled. Hospital's been notified you're involved in a federal investigation and won't be returning. What about my apartment? My things? A team will collect essentials and bring them to the safe house. Anything else can wait. It was happening too fast. Her entire life dismantled and repacked in the span of one conversation. Sophia wanted to argue, wanted to fight back against the momentum carrying her away from everything familiar, but she couldn't find the energy. A black SUV pulled up to the loading dock. Not the one Cross had crashed. A new one, windows tinted dark, government plates. 2 agents in suits stood beside it, professional and impersonal. That's your ride, Cross said. They'll take care of you. Sophia started toward the SUV, then stopped. What about Reed when he wakes up? What about him? Tell him I kept him alive. Tell him the nurse everyone dismissed as too soft for trauma work is the reason he's not in a morgue right now. She felt something sharp in her chest. Tell him that matters. Cross nodded once. I will. She climbed into the SUV with Axel. The agents didn't protest the dog's presence. Maybe Cross had already cleared it, or maybe they just didn't care. The doors closed. The vehicle pulled away from the hospital, windshield wipers fighting the rain. Sophia looked back through the rear window. Mercy Ridge Hospital was lit up like a crime scene. Police lights, emergency vehicles, agents swarming through every entrance. The place where she'd worked for 6 months trying to build a quiet, normal life. Gone now. All of it gone. The safe house turned out to be a nondescript rental in a residential neighborhood 40 minutes outside Seattle. 2-bedroom ranch, anonymous furniture, security cameras covering every angle. The agents who'd driven her showed her around with minimal conversation. Bedroom upstairs, kitchen stocked with basics, panic button in every room, armed detail in the house across the street. Don't leave without clearance, one agent said. Don't contact anyone from your previous life. Don't post on social media. Don't do anything that might indicate your location. Then they left her alone. Sophia sat on the couch in the dark living room, rain still hammering outside. Axel curled up at her feet. She should sleep, should eat something, should do any of the normal human maintenance her body was screaming for. Instead, she pulled up her sleeve and looked at the faded Viper tattoo. Traced the snake and medical symbols with one finger. Tried to remember who she'd been when she'd gotten this ink. Young, idealistic, convinced she was serving something important. She'd learned better. Learned that classified operations were classified for reasons that had nothing to do with national security and everything to do with covering up crimes. Learned that asking questions made you a liability. Learned that the people giving orders weren't necessarily the good guys. So she'd left, changed her name, buried her service record, became the kind of person who existed in comfortable obscurity. A nurse nobody noticed. Someone who could live a quiet life and never think about Istanbul again. Except Istanbul had found her anyway. Had walked through the ER doors in the form of a dying commander and a combat dog who remembered her face. Her phone, a temporary burner the FBI had given her, buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. This is Major Cross. Reads out of surgery. Stable condition. Doctors say he'll make a full recovery. Thought you'd want to know. She stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Sophia. Thank you. 3 dots appeared, indicating Cross was typing, then disappeared, then appeared again. Cross. You asked me to tell Reed something. I did. His response was that he already knew. Said anyone who could calm Axel like that wasn't someone to underestimate. Sophia felt something crack in her chest. Not quite tears, but close. Sophia. Did you find the manifests? Cross. Still looking. Reed's not conscious enough to give us details. But we did find something interesting in Pierce's office. Offshore bank records, payments to Aegis Solutions Group, wire transfers from a DoD account that shouldn't exist. Sophia. How high does this go? Cross. High enough that I've been ordered to limit the investigation to known suspects. Someone upstairs is nervous. Sophia. Someone upstairs is involved. Cross. That's what we're worried about. The phone went silent. Sophia set it down and leaned back against the couch, feeling the weight of everything settling on her shoulders. This wasn't over. The assault on the hospital might have failed, but the people behind it, the ones with DoD contracts and offshore accounts, and the power to order military cover-ups, they were still out there. Still planning, still dangerous. Axel stirred at her feet, lifting his massive head to look at her. His eyes caught the light from outside, reflecting amber in the darkness. We're in trouble, aren't we? She said to the dog. Axel's tail thumped once against the floor. Not agreement, just acknowledgement that she'd spoken. Sophia closed her eyes. Tried to imagine what morning would look like. FBI interviews. Formal statements. Depositions about operations that didn't officially exist. And somewhere in all that bureaucracy, the real criminals would be covering their tracks, destroying evidence, ensuring that nobody with actual power ever faced consequences. Unless she found the manifests first, the thought appeared fully formed, dangerous and ridiculous in equal measure. She was in protective custody, under FBI supervision, being watched by agents specifically assigned to keep her safe and stationary. But she was also the person who'd survived Istanbul, who'd navigated hostile territory and military corruption and come out the other side alive. Who'd mapped every exit route in Mercy Ridge Hospital during her first week because old habits died hard. Who knew how to disappear when she needed to. Sophia opened her eyes and looked at Axel. If I asked you to help me do something really stupid, would you? The dog's ears came forward. That's what I thought. She stood up and walked through the safe house, taking mental inventory. Security cameras outside, but none inside, which meant the FBI was giving her privacy. Armed detail across the street, but probably bored after hours of watching nothing happen. Panic buttons in every room, but only useful if she wanted help. The back door had a standard deadbolt. No alarm that she could see. The fence was chain link 6 feet high, manageable for someone motivated enough. Her temporary phone buzzed again. Cross. One more thing. We're analyzing the assault patterns from tonight. The contractors didn't just know the hospital layout. They knew our response protocols. Someone fed them classified tactical information. Sophia. A mole in the FBI? Cross. Or DIA. Or DOD. We're not sure yet, but it means we can't trust standard channels. I'm working with a small team I know personally. Nobody else gets read in until we know who's compromised. Sophia. Be careful. Cross. You too. Stay put. Stay safe. We'll handle this. Sophia set the phone down and looked out the window at the rain. At the house across the street where agents were supposedly watching. At the empty residential street that led to a main road that connected to highways that went everywhere. Stay put, Cross had said. But staying put had never been her specialty. She went upstairs and changed out of her blood-soaked scrubs into the civilian clothes the FBI had packed from her apartment. Jeans, dark jacket, hiking boots, pulled her hair into a tight ponytail, looked at herself in the mirror and saw someone she'd tried very hard not to be for the last 5 years. When she came back downstairs, Axel was already waiting by the back door. Smart dog, she said quietly. The window in the bathroom was small but manageable. She opened it slowly, checking for sensors. Nothing obvious. Either the FBI had been sloppy with the safe house setup, or they'd never expected someone in protective custody to run. Sophia climbed through, dropped into the backyard, and waited in the shadows. No alarms, no shouts, just rain and darkness and the distant hum of highway traffic. Axel squeezed through the window after her, barely fitting, scraping his sides on the frame, and landed silently beside her. They moved along the fence line, staying low, until they reached the back corner farthest from the surveillance house. The chain link was wet and slippery, but Sophia had climbed worse. She went over in 10 seconds, landing in the neighbor's yard, then helped guide Axel as he scrambled over behind her. 3 houses down, she found what she was looking for. A beat-up Toyota Corolla with a for sale sign in the window and keys hidden in a magnetic box under the wheel well. Common practice in neighborhoods where people trusted each other. Stupid practice for someone trying to sell a car. Useful practice for someone stealing one. Sophia opened the door and Axel jumped into the passenger seat without hesitation. She hot-wired the ignition, another skill from another life, and pulled away from the curb with headlights off until she'd turned the corner. Her phone would have GPS. The FBI would track it within minutes of realizing she was gone. She rolled down the window and threw the phone into a storm drain. Then she drove toward Seattle, wipers fighting rain, mind racing through possibilities. Reed had found proof of the trafficking operation. Shipping manifests that documented years of illegal weapons moving through humanitarian channels. He'd hidden them somewhere before the assassination attempt, somewhere he'd thought was safe, somewhere that wasn't his home or his office or any location the criminals would think to search. Sophia ran through what she knew about Reed. Military officer, covert operations specialist, the kind of person who understood how to hide evidence from people trained to find it, which meant he'd hidden it somewhere obvious, somewhere nobody would think to look because it was too simple. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel. The hospital. Reed had hidden the evidence at Mercy Ridge Hospital. It was the only thing that made sense. He'd been investigating Pierce, which meant he'd been inside the hospital before tonight. Had probably been there multiple times, watching, gathering proof. And when he'd realized he was in danger, he'd stashed the manifest somewhere in the building, somewhere accessible to him, but invisible to everyone else. Sophia knew Mercy Ridge better than anyone. 6 months of night shifts, mapping exits, learning the building's secrets. If Reed had hidden something there, she could find it. Assuming the FBI hadn't already searched the entire facility and confiscated everything as evidence. Assuming the criminals hadn't sent someone back to retrieve whatever Reed had hidden. Assuming she didn't get caught breaking into a federal crime scene and arrested for obstruction of justice. Axel made a sound that might have been a whine or might have been encouragement, hard to tell with combat dogs. "I know," Sophia said. "This is a terrible idea." But she kept driving anyway. The hospital came into view 20 minutes later, still lit up, still surrounded by police vehicles, but fewer than before. The initial response was winding down. Investigators were processing evidence inside, but the perimeter had relaxed slightly. Sophia parked 3 blocks away and studied the building. The main entrances would be guarded. The emergency bay was probably locked down, but there were service entrances, loading docks, maintenance access points that most people forgot about, including the tunnel entrance she'd escaped through earlier tonight. If it wasn't blocked off yet, if the FBI hadn't discovered it during their sweep, she could get inside. She looked at Axel. Last chance to be the smart one and stay in the car. The dog's response was to open his door, somehow nosing the handle until it clicked, and jump out onto the wet pavement. "Right," Sophia said. "Stupid it is." They moved through rain-soaked streets, staying in shadows, avoiding the police presence near the hospital's front entrance. The service tunnel access was in an alley 2 buildings over, a rusted maintenance door that most people walked past without noticing. Sophia had noticed it her second week at Mercy Ridge, had tested the lock out of professional paranoia and found it opened with basic picks. The door was still unlocked, either from the earlier chaos or because nobody had thought to secure it yet. She and Axel slipped inside, closing the door behind them. Total darkness. Sophia used her phone's flashlight, then remembered she'd thrown her phone away. Cursed quietly. Felt along the wall until she found the emergency lighting panel and flipped the switch. Dim red lights flickered to life, illuminating the tunnel that led back to the hospital basement. No voices. No footsteps. Either the FBI hadn't found this access point yet, or they'd cleared it and moved on. Sophia started walking, Axel close beside her, every sense on high alert. The tunnel felt longer than she remembered, colder. The walls seemed to press in from all sides. They reached the basement level and Sophia stopped, listening. Somewhere above, voices echoed. Agents, probably, still processing the crime scene. But down here, nothing. Just pipes dripping and ancient HVAC systems humming. She needed to think like Reed. Where would a covert operations officer hide classified documents in a hospital he was investigating? Not somewhere obvious like an office or storage room. Those would be searched immediately. Not somewhere secure like a safe, too hard to access quickly if he needed the evidence in a hurry. Somewhere temporary. Somewhere he could retrieve the manifests easily, but where they'd remain hidden from casual observation. The morgue. The thought hit her with absolute certainty. The morgue was in the basement, accessible through the same service corridors Reed would have used to move through the hospital unseen, and it was the one place people avoided unless they absolutely had to be there. Sophia moved through the basement, following signs toward the morgue entrance. Axel stayed close, his breathing steady, but his body tense, ready for threats that might appear at any second. The morgue doors were unlocked. She pushed through into the cold, sterile room that smelled of formaldehyde and death. Metal drawers lined one wall. Examination tables sat empty in the center. Everything was exactly as clinical and depressing as she remembered. Where would Reed hide something here? Not in the drawers, too obvious. Not on the examination tables, too exposed. Sophia scanned the room, looking for anything out of place. Her eyes landed on the ceiling tiles. Drop ceiling. Standard in most hospitals. Easy to access, rarely checked, perfect for hiding something flat like documents. She grabbed a rolling stool and climbed up, pushing aside one of the tiles near the corner. Reached into the space above, feeling around in darkness and dust and probably asbestos. Her fingers touched plastic. She pulled out a zippered document bag, sealed tight, surprisingly heavy. Climbed down and set it on the examination table with hands that had started shaking again. Inside were 3 USB drives and a stack of printed manifests. Shipping records, bank transfers, names and dates, and proof of weapons moving through humanitarian channels for the last 4 years. Enough evidence to destroy careers, end contracts, and send people to federal prison for decades. This was what Reed had been protecting. What people had tried to kill him to prevent from being exposed. And now Sophia was holding it in her hands. Axel growled low in his throat, warning sound she'd learned to recognize. Sophia looked up. Standing in the morgue doorway was Marcus Webb, the charge nurse from the ER. The man who'd spent 6 months treating her like furniture, who'd never once spoken to her unless absolutely necessary. He was holding a gun pointed directly at her chest. "That doesn't belong to you," Marcus said quietly. Sophia didn't move. The document bag sat on the examination table between them, heavy with evidence that could end careers and lives. Marcus's gun was steady, too steady for someone who'd never held a weapon before. "You're not a nurse," Sophia said. "I am, just not only a nurse." Marcus stepped further into the morgue, closing the door behind him with his free hand. "Same as you, I guess. Funny how that works." Axel's growl deepened, muscles coiling beneath scarred fur. Marcus's eyes flicked to the dog for half a second. "Tell him to stand down or I shoot him first." "You shoot him and you die before your second bullet clears the chamber." Sophia's voice came out calmer than she felt. "He's faster than you think." "Then we're all taking chances tonight." Marcus moved sideways, angling for a better position. "Put the bag down. Step away from it. Do it now." Sophia's hand stayed on the bag. "How long have you been working for them?" "Long enough to know Reed was getting too close. Long enough to feed Pierce information about federal response protocols." He smiled without warmth. "Long enough to make sure you stayed exactly where they wanted you. Invisible, dismissed, someone nobody would listen to if you started asking questions." The pieces fell into place with sick clarity. 6 months of being ignored, of having her expertise questioned, of being treated like she didn't belong. It hadn't been random cruelty or workplace politics, it had been deliberate isolation. "You made sure nobody trusted me," Sophia said. "I made sure nobody saw you. Big difference. Can't be a witness if you're furniture." Marcus gestured with the gun. "Now the bag. Last time I'm asking." Sophia calculated angles and distances. Marcus was 8 feet away. Axel could cover that in under 2 seconds. But the gun was already aimed and Marcus had his finger on the trigger. Even if the dog took him down, the weapon would discharge. Might hit her. Might hit Axel. Might ricochet off metal examination tables and kill them both. She needed him talking, needed him distracted. Who gave the orders? Pierce? Pierce was middle management, useful for access and information, but he didn't run anything. Marcus's jaw tightened. The people running this operation don't work in hospitals. They work in offices with government seals and security clearances and enough power to make problems disappear. DoD contractors, among others. You think Aegis Solutions Group operates without military oversight? You think weapons trafficking happens on that scale without someone official looking the other way? He laughed bitterly. Reed thought he could expose it. Thought gathering evidence and playing whistleblower would matter. Didn't understand that the people he was investigating owned the channels he'd report through. Sophia felt cold spreading through her chest. You're saying the investigation is compromised. I'm saying there is no investigation. Just containment. Reed gets eliminated. The manifests disappear. A few contractors take the fall as rogue operators, and everyone with real power walks away clean. Marcus took another step closer. Now give me the bag or I put a bullet in your head and take it anyway. Axel launched before Sophia could give the command. 70 pounds of combat-trained muscle and fury covered 8 feet in the time it took Marcus to shift his aim. The gun went off, deafening in the enclosed space, but the bullet went wide, punching through ceiling tiles as Axel's jaws closed around Marcus's wrist. Marcus screamed. The gun clattered to the floor. They went down together in a tangle of limbs and teeth and violence. Sophia grabbed the weapon and pointed it at the struggling mass of dog and human. Couldn't get a clean shot. Couldn't risk hitting Axel. Marcus got a hand free and drove his fist into the dog's ribs. Axel yelped but didn't release. Just bit down harder, shaking his head like he was tearing apart prey. The morgue door burst open. 3 FBI agents poured through, weapons raised, shouting commands that overlapped into chaos. Federal agents! Drop the weapon! Get the dog off him! Hands where we can see them! Sophia set the gun down carefully and raised her hands. The dog's protecting me. The man he's attacking tried to kill me. One agent grabbed Axel's collar, trying to pull him off. The dog growled and held position, jaws still locked on Marcus's wrist. The agent pulled harder. Axel finally released, backing up against Sophia's legs, blood on his muzzle. Marcus was sobbing, cradling his mangled arm. She attacked me. She broke into the morgue and tried to steal evidence. That evidence. Sophia pointed to the document bag. Shipping manifests proving weapons trafficking through DoD humanitarian contracts. Commander Reed hid them here before the assassination attempt. Marcus was trying to retrieve them for whoever ordered the hit. The lead agent, a woman Sophia didn't recognize, picked up the bag and unzipped it. Her expression went carefully neutral as she examined the contents. How did you know these were here? I didn't. I guessed. Sophia kept her hands raised even though nobody was pointing weapons at her anymore. Reed needed to hide proof somewhere accessible but not obvious. The morgue made sense. And you decided to retrieve them yourself instead of reporting this to the federal agents assigned to protect you? I decided I couldn't trust anyone until I knew how deep the corruption went. She looked at Marcus, still crying on the floor. Turns out that was the right call. The agent spoke into her radio. This is Morrison. I need evidence collection and medical to the basement morgue. And get Major Cross down here. Now. Morrison, the DIA operative from the assault. Sophia felt something unclench slightly in her chest. You followed me, Sophia said. Your safe house detail reported you missing 20 minutes ago. We tracked the stolen vehicle to 3 blocks from here. Morrison examined the manifests more closely. Cross said you were stubborn, didn't mention you were reckless. Is there a difference? Usually the second one gets you killed. Morrison sealed the document bag and handed it to another agent. Secure this. Chain of custody from here to headquarters. Nobody touches it without my direct authorization. Marcus had stopped sobbing. His eyes tracked the bag with desperate intensity. You don't understand what you're doing. Those people, they'll kill everyone involved. You, Reed, her, everyone. That's the idea. Morrison crouched beside him. Make them desperate. Make them sloppy. Make them expose themselves trying to contain the exposure. She smiled without humor. You're going to help us with that. I'm not saying anything. You already did. Morrison gestured to the agent's body camera. Everything since we entered has been recorded and uploaded to secure servers. Your threats, your confession about feeding Pierce classified information, your attempt to murder a federal witness. She stood up. You're done. Medical arrived to treat Marcus's arm. He didn't resist as they bandaged the wounds and prepared him for transport. His face had gone blank, empty of everything except the recognition that he'd lost. Cross appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene with one quick sweep. His eyes landed on Sophia. You were supposed to stay in protective custody. I was. Then I decided evidence was more important than safety. That's not how witness protection works. I'm not a very good witness then. Sophia felt exhaustion crashing over her again. The adrenaline was wearing off and taking her remaining energy with it. Did I just destroy your investigation by breaking chain of custody? You destroyed my investigation by disappearing from a safe house and stealing a car. Cross picked up the gun Marcus had dropped, checking the chamber. But you also recovered evidence we didn't know existed, so I'm calling it even. Morrison was already on her phone, coordinating something with whoever was on the other end. She hung up and turned to Cross. Forensic accounting is tracing the bank transfers now. Names are starting to surface. 3 DOD procurement officers, 2 Aegis executives, and 1 State Department liaison who's been coordinating overseas shipments for 4 years. Cross's expression darkened. How high does it go? High enough that I've been ordered to stop asking. Morrison's voice was flat. Someone upstairs wants this contained to the contractors. They're preparing a narrative about rogue operators and failed oversight. They're preparing a cover-up. That's my assessment. Sophia looked between them. You're federal agents. Can't you just refuse? Cross laughed without humor. Refuse orders from the Deputy Director of Defense Intelligence? Sure, right before I get charged with insubordination and lose my clearance. He paused. But we might not have to refuse directly. What does that mean? It means evidence has a way of becoming public when people try too hard to bury it. Cross gestured to the document bag. Those manifests document 4 years of illegal weapons trafficking. If they somehow ended up in the hands of, say, a journalist with sources in DOD who could verify authenticity, that would be a catastrophic security breach, Morrison said carefully. It would? Terrible thing. Heads would roll over operational security failures like that. Cross met her eyes. But the corruption would be exposed. The people involved would face real consequences instead of quiet reassignments. Morrison considered this for several seconds. If someone leaked those documents, I'd be obligated to investigate, track down the source, prosecute whoever violated classification protocols. Of course, that's your job. But investigations take time, especially complex ones involving multiple agencies and jurisdictions. Could take months to identify the leak source. Longer if the evidence trail was deliberately confusing. They were talking in circles around something Sophia understood perfectly. Cross was going to leak the manifests. Morrison was going to look the other way long enough for the information to spread beyond anyone's ability to contain it. That's a career-ending move, Sophia said quietly. Probably. Cross didn't sound concerned. But Stevens died tonight protecting Reed. Protecting evidence of crimes that might get buried by the same people who commissioned them. I'd rather end my career doing the right thing than extend it staying silent. Marcus was being carried out on a stretcher, still conscious, listening to every word. His eyes met Sophia's for a moment, and she saw genuine fear there now. Not of prison, of whoever had employed him realizing he'd failed. The morgue felt smaller suddenly, colder. Sophia thought about 6 months of isolation and dismissal, about being treated as invisible until the moment her skills became inconvenient, about a system that valued silence over integrity. I want to testify, she said. Cross looked at her. Against who? Everyone. Marcus, Pierce, Aegis Solutions Group, every DOD official who signed off on fraudulent shipments. I want them in court. I want their names public. I want consequences that matter. They'll bury you, discredit your testimony, claim you're unreliable. Let them try. Sophia felt something hardening in her chest. I've been underestimated my entire career. People made assumptions about who I was and what I could do, dismissed me because I was quiet, because I didn't make noise, because I tried to live a normal life instead of broadcasting my past. She looked at Axel, still pressed against her legs. But I survived Istanbul, survived tonight, found evidence federal agents missed, and I'm not staying silent while criminals walk free because prosecution is inconvenient. Morrison studied her face. You understand what you're volunteering for? The legal battles, the threats, the years of your life consumed by depositions and trials and appeals. I understand I'm tired of watching bad people escape consequences because good people decide fighting isn't worth the effort. Fair enough. Morrison pulled out her phone. I'm calling the U.S. Attorney's Office. If we're doing this, we're doing it right. Full investigation, full prosecution, no deals for cooperation, no quiet reassignments. Cross nodded slowly. Then I'm making some calls too. Journalists I trust. Contacts at oversight committees. People who will make sure this doesn't disappear quietly. They moved into action with the kind of synchronized purpose Sophia recognized from military operations. Morrison coordinating with prosecutors. Cross reaching out to media sources. Evidence bags being cataloged and sealed. Body camera footage uploaded to multiple secure servers. The morgue transformed into a command center. More agents arrived. Someone set up a laptop and started pulling financial records. Another agent was on a conference call with DOD's Inspector General office, voice tight with tension. Sophia sat against the wall, Axel beside her, watching it unfold. She should feel triumphant, vindicated, finally visible after months of being ignored. Instead, she just felt tired. An agent approached with a tablet. Ms. Calloway, we need to take your formal statement. Everything you remember about Istanbul, the Viper program, your interactions with Commander Reed tonight, and how you located the manifests. She spent the next 3 hours talking, answering questions, clarifying details, walking investigators through timelines and operational procedures from a program that officially didn't exist. Her throat went raw, her hands kept shaking from exhaustion and delayed shock. Someone brought her coffee that had gone cold before she remembered to drink it. Cross appeared sometime after dawn, looking as exhausted as she felt. Reed's awake, asking for you. Sophia stood on legs that didn't want to hold her weight. I'm not cleared to leave. You're a federal witness in protective custody. I'm your escort. That's how clearance works. He gestured toward the door. Come on, we'll take the stairs. Avoid the press camped outside. The hospital felt different in daylight. Empty hallways that had been war zones hours ago. Bullet holes in walls covered with plastic sheeting, bloodstains someone had tried unsuccessfully to scrub away. Evidence markers everywhere. They took a service elevator to the 4th floor. 2 FBI agents stood outside Reed's room, checking IDs before allowing entry. Inside, monitors beeped steadily. IV bags hung from poles. Reed looked pale and drawn, but alive, his eyes sharp despite obvious pain. You're the Viper medic, he said when Sophia entered. Not a question. Was 5 years ago. She stayed near the door, suddenly uncertain. I'm Sophia Calloway now. Major Cross told me you found the manifests, that you survived an assault team and broke into a federal crime scene to recover evidence. Reed shifted slightly, wincing. That's not normal nurse behavior. I'm not a normal nurse. Clearly. He studied her face. I remember you. From the ER. You calmed Axel when nobody else could. Kept me alive when the situation was impossible. He paused. Thank you. Sophia felt something crack open in her chest. You're welcome. Cross said you're willing to testify, that you know the cost and you're doing it anyway. Someone has to. Reed nodded slowly. The people we're exposing, they're not going to surrender quietly. They'll fight. Dirty. Witnesses will be discredited or disappear. Evidence will be challenged. Careers will be destroyed on both sides. I know. And you're still willing? I spent 6 months being invisible, being dismissed by people who thought I wasn't worth noticing. Sophia moved closer to the bed. Then I spent one night proving them wrong, saving lives, exposing corruption, being exactly who I actually am instead of who they assumed. She met his eyes. I'm not going back to invisible. Reed smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face. Good. We need people like you. He gestured to the chair beside his bed. Sit. I want to know about Istanbul, about the K9 unit, about what really happened when the program collapsed. Sophia sat, started talking. Told him things she hadn't said aloud in 5 years. About the operations, the handlers, the explosion that killed Lieutenant Marks and destroyed half the team, about watching classified programs get buried because exposure was politically inconvenient. Reed listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "Oh, shoot. They tried to bury you too," he said finally. "Made you disappear into civilian life. Told you the service didn't matter, that speaking up would only hurt you." Something like that. "But you didn't stay buried." "Neither did you." He laughed, then immediately regretted it, pressing a hand to his bandaged chest. "Fair point." His expression turned serious. "What happens after this? After the trials and the testimony? You can't go back to Mercy Ridge, can't return to the life you had." Sophia hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't considered the afterwards when she was too busy surviving the during. "I don't know. DIA is hiring. Combat medics with operational experience and security clearances are valuable. I could make some calls. I'm done with classified operations. Then medical consulting, teaching, private security healthcare." Reed shifted again, managing the pain with visible effort. "Point is, you've got options. You're not invisible anymore. People see you now, see what you can do." Sophia thought about that. About 6 months of being furniture and 1 night of being essential. About the cost of visibility and the price of silence. "I'll figure it out," she said. Cross stuck his head into the room. "Sophia, news conference is starting in 10 minutes. Federal prosecutors holding it at DOJ headquarters. They're announcing charges." She stood up. "That was fast." "Morrison pushed hard, called in every favor, threatened to resign if they tried to bury this." He smiled grimly. "Turns out publicly threatening to quit over a cover-up gets people's attention." They watched the press conference on the hospital room TV. The U.S. attorney stood at a podium surrounded by FBI and DIA officials, announcing criminal charges against 14 individuals, 3 DoD procurement officers, 5 Aegis Solutions Group executives, 4 State Department officials, and 2 hospital employees. The charges included weapons trafficking, conspiracy to commit murder, federal corruption, obstruction of justice, and about 20 other crimes that carried decades in prison. The attorney mentioned Mercy Ridge Hospital by name, described the assault, named Pierce and Marcus as co-conspirators, referenced classified operations and weapons shipments worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed. The attorney maintained professional neutrality, but Sophia could see satisfaction beneath the surface. This was public, irreversible, too big to bury quietly. Reed watched in silence until the press conference ended. Then he looked at Sophia. "You did that. You made that happen. Cross and Morrison did that. They recovered evidence. You gave them reason to care, reminded them why the work matters." He gestured to the now blank TV screen. "Those people are facing justice because you refused to stay quiet. That means something." Sophia wanted to believe him, wanted to think one person's choice could make a difference in systems designed to protect themselves. But she'd seen too many cover-ups, too many times when exposure led to carefully managed consequences that barely touched the people with real power. "The charges are just the beginning," she said. "They still have to convict." "They will, because you'll testify, because the evidence is solid, because too many people are watching now for it to disappear quietly." Reed's expression was certain. "This time the bad guys lose." Sophia nodded, trying to share his confidence. Cross's phone rang. He answered, listened for 30 seconds, then hung up with an expression she couldn't read. "That was headquarters," he said carefully. "All 14 defendants just had their assets frozen. Bank accounts seized, property quarantined. Federal marshals are executing arrest warrants as we speak." "That's good news," Reed said. "It is." Cross paused. "But there's more. 2 of the DoD officials just attempted suicide. 1 succeeded. The other is in critical condition." The words hung in the air like smoke. Sophia felt her stomach drop. They'd rather die than face trial. Or someone decided loose ends needed tying up. Cross rubbed his face. "Either way, we've got 1 less witness and another who might not survive to testify." Reed's expression had gone dark. "How long before the others start making deals, trading information for reduced sentences?" "Already happening. Aegis executives are falling over themselves to cooperate. offering testimony against higher-ups in exchange for immunity. Which higher-ups? That's where it gets interesting. Cross pulled out his phone, showing them an email. Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Logistics, 2 senators on the Armed Services Committee, a State Department undersecretary, people with real power who thought they were insulated. Sophia read the names, felt them settling into her memory like stones. They're going to fight back. Use every resource they have. Let them. Cross's voice was hard. Morrison's already coordinating with oversight committees. Congressional investigations are launching alongside the criminal trials. Too many eyes watching, too many agencies involved. They can fight, but they're not winning. A commotion erupted in the hallway outside. Raised voices. Someone arguing with the FBI detail. The door burst open and Hendricks pushed through, still wearing scrubs from last night, her face streaked with tears and fury. "They're arresting Marcus," she said without preamble, "taking him out in handcuffs in front of everyone. The entire staff is watching." "Good," Sophia said quietly. Hendricks turned on her. "You knew. Last night, when everything was chaos, you knew he was involved." "I suspected. Didn't know until he tried to kill me in the morgue. He was my charge nurse for 3 years, trained me, helped me through—" Hendricks' voice broke. How could he be part of this? Money? Pressure? Ideology? Take your pick. Sophia kept her voice neutral, even though seeing Hendricks' pain stirred something uncomfortable. People make choices. He made his. And now he's going to prison. If there's justice, yes. Hendricks stared at her for a long moment. I treated you terribly. All of us did. We ignored you, dismissed you, let Pierce walk all over you because it was easier than standing up. She wiped her eyes. And you saved all our lives anyway. Sophia didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know how to accept an apology that came 6 months and 1 lifetime too late. I'm not looking for thanks, she said finally. Well, you're getting it anyway. Hendricks's voice strengthened. What you did last night, keeping Reed alive, finding evidence, exposing corruption, that matters. And I'm sorry we made you feel like you didn't belong at Mercy Ridge. You belong there more than any of us. The words should have felt vindicating, should have filled the hollow space that 6 months of isolation had carved out. Instead, they just felt sad, like recognition that came too late to change anything that mattered. I appreciate that, Sophia said, but I'm not coming back. I know, just wanted you to hear it anyway. Hendricks turned to leave, then stopped. For what it's worth, I hope they all rot in prison. After she left, Reed looked at Sophia. How does it feel, being vindicated? Empty, Sophia admitted. Winning doesn't undo the 6 months before. No, but it prevents the 6 months after, for everyone else who comes behind you. He shifted in bed, managing pain that medication couldn't fully touch. That has to count for something. Maybe it did. Sophia wasn't sure yet. Cross's phone rang again. This time his expression shifted from neutral to shocked. He answered quickly. Say that again? Pause. You're certain? Verified? Another pause. Understood. We're coming now. He hung up and looked at them both. Morrison just got a call from DOD's Inspector General. Someone just walked into their office with additional evidence. Internal Pentagon emails documenting the entire operation, authorization for weapons shipments, payment schedules, orders to eliminate Reed when he got too close. Who walked in? Reed asked. Dr. Patricia Hendricks. Cross's voice was carefully controlled. Apparently she's been compiling evidence for weeks. Saw things in Pierce's office, overheard conversations. Didn't know who to trust until tonight made it clear the corruption went deeper than one hospital director. Sophia felt the world tilt slightly. Patricia came forward? Voluntarily. Brought 2 years of documentation. Said she couldn't stay silent after watching you risk everything to do the right thing. Cross smiled without humor. You inspired a secondary witness. That's going to make prosecution considerably easier. Reed laughed, careful of his injuries, and shook his head. You broke the case wide open. Recovered evidence federal agents missed, survived an assassination attempt, and inspired a coworker to become a whistleblower. That's one hell of a night. That's one hell of a career restart, Cross corrected. When this is over, Sophia, you're going to have options. Real ones. Agencies will want to hire you. Private firms will offer consulting positions. Hell, you could probably write a book and retire on the advance. Sophia looked at Axel, who'd been lying quietly in the corner throughout the entire conversation. The dog's eyes were fixed on her with patient intensity. Waiting, always waiting. "What happens to him?" she asked. "Axel?" Cross followed her gaze. "Officially, he's military property. Should return to his unit for reassignment." "His unit doesn't exist anymore. His handler's recovering from surgery, and he's been with me since the assault started." Sophia moved to sit beside the dog, running her hands through scarred fur. "He stays with me." "That's not standard protocol." "I don't care about protocol. He's earned retirement, earned peace, earned an owner who understands what he's been through." She looked up at Cross. "Make it happen." Cross started to argue, then stopped. Something in Sophia's expression made him reconsider. "I'll see what I can do. No promises." "You'll do better than try. Because if he gets reassigned, I'll adopt him anyway and spend the next decade fighting military bureaucracy over ownership." Sophia's voice was flat. "Your choice whether that fight happens quietly or in front of news cameras documenting the federal witness who saved a classified operation." Reed grinned. "I think she's serious." "I think she is too." Cross pulled out his phone. "Give me an hour. I'll make some calls." He left the room. Sophia stayed with Axel, listening to monitors beep and Reed's careful breathing and the distant sounds of a hospital trying to process trauma and scandal in equal measure. "You know what the best part of this is?" Reed said after a while. "What?" "They tried to make you invisible, tried to bury your service record and push you into obscurity, wanted you forgotten." He smiled. "Instead, you became the witness who exposed everything, the person who couldn't be silenced or intimidated, the one who made the entire system accountable." Sophia thought about that, about visibility and invisibility, about the cost of both. "I just wanted to save lives," she said quietly. "You did. More than you know. More than just mine." Reed's expression turned serious. "But you also did something harder. You proved that integrity matters, that one person refusing to stay silent can change everything." Before Sophia could respond, Morrison entered the room, tablet in hand, expression carefully neutral. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. Cross returned seconds later, clearly having received the same message. "How bad?" "Bad enough that I'm here instead of handling it remotely." Morrison set the tablet on Reed's bed, showing an encrypted message. "One of the State Department officials just disappeared, missed his arrest warrant, cleaned out his accounts, and vanished within a 2-hour window." "Which one?" Reed leaned forward despite visible pain. "Martin Voss, Deputy Undersecretary. He was the primary liaison coordinating overseas shipments." Morrison pulled up a photo. Middle-aged white man, distinguished looking, the kind of face that appeared in official government portraits. "He's got money, contacts, and 4 years' worth of classified information that makes him extremely valuable to hostile intelligence services." "You think he's running?" Cross said. "I think he's already gone. Private jet left Dulles 90 minutes ago. Destination filed as Mexico City, but the flight plan was amended mid-air. Now we don't know where he is." Sophia felt cold spreading through her chest. He's going to sell everything he knows. Or use it as leverage. Either way, he's a catastrophic security breach. Morrison's jaw was tight. And he's not the only one. 2 Aegis executives are also unaccounted for. Their families reported them missing this morning. Reed swore viciously. "They're cutting loose ends. Anyone who might testify is either dead or disappeared." "We've moved the remaining defendants into federal protective custody," Morrison said. "Maximum security. But if Voss reaches out to them, offers deals or threats, they'll reconsider cooperation," Cross finished, "and our case falls apart." The room went silent except for the monitors and distant hospital sounds. Sophia looked at the faces around her, federal agents and military officers processing a situation spiraling beyond anyone's control. "So what do we do?" she asked. Morrison met her eyes. "We find Voss before he disappears permanently, before he makes deals that compromise national security, before he warns everyone else involved that we're coming for them." She paused. "And we do it fast. Because every hour he's loose, our case gets weaker and more witnesses vanish." "How do you find someone with 4 years of classified information and unlimited resources?" Sophia felt the question land like lead. Same way Reed found evidence everyone else missed. Morrison looked at her steadily. "We think like the target, anticipate their moves, Use everything we know about their psychology and patterns. Reed did that by investigating for months. You did it by recognizing patterns nobody else saw. Morrison's voice was calm but intense. You found the manifests because you understood how an operator thinks, where they'd hide evidence, what risks they'd take. She gestured to the tablet showing Voss's photo. So tell me, where does a corrupt State Department official run when his entire operation collapses? Sophia stared at the photo, at Martin Voss's distinguished face and calculated smile, tried to think like someone whose power had just evaporated, someone facing decades in federal prison, someone with secrets valuable enough to buy protection from hostile governments. He goes somewhere we can't touch him, she said slowly. Somewhere without extradition treaties. Somewhere that wants American intelligence badly enough to grant asylum. Russia, Cross said immediately. Or China. Maybe Venezuela or Iran. All of which have sophisticated counterintelligence operations watching for exactly this kind of defection. Morrison pulled up flight tracking data. But Voss's private jet amended its flight plan to avoid Venezuelan airspace, refueled in the Cayman Islands. Last known position was heading southeast over the Caribbean. Sophia studied the map. That's not Russia or China. That's Cuba, Reed said quietly. He's running to Cuba. The pieces fell into place. Cuba had interests in undermining American military operations, had intelligence services hungry for classified information, had a government that would shelter a high-value defector while negotiating what they could extract from him. And most importantly, Cuba was close enough that Voss could reach it before anyone organized an interception. Morrison was already on her phone, coordinating with someone at Coast Guard Command. Her voice was clipped and urgent. When she hung up, her expression was grim. Voss's plane landed in Havana 40 minutes ago. Cuban officials are claiming he requested political asylum based on persecution by the U.S. government. She looked at Reed. He's beyond our reach. Everything he knows, everything about the trafficking operation, the classified programs, the military contacts, it's all compromised. The silence that followed was absolute. Then Reed laughed, sharp and bitter and completely without humor. So we exposed the corruption, arrested most of the conspirators, and the one person with enough information to bring down everyone involved just handed everything to a hostile foreign government. He shook his head. That's a hell of an ending. It's not over, Sophia said. They all looked at her. Voss defecting doesn't erase the evidence we already have. The manifest, the bank records, Patricia's documentation, testimony from the defendants in custody. She felt certainty building as she spoke. He can run. He can give Cuba intelligence that embarrasses DOD, but he can't stop the prosecutions, can't prevent the people still here from facing consequences. He can warn them, Morrison said. Tell them what we know. Help them build defenses. Then we move faster. File charges before they can coordinate. Isolate defendants so they can't communicate. Make deals with whoever cooperates first and freezes out everyone else. Sophia looked at Reed. You said these people would fight dirty. Fine. We fight smarter. Cross was watching her with something that might have been respect. You're talking about aggressive prosecution tactics, maximum pressure, no mercy. I'm talking about justice that actually matters. About making sure the corruption we expose doesn't just fade into classified reports and quiet settlements. Sophia's voice was steady. Voss got away. That's done. But everyone else answers for what they did. Morrison considered this for several seconds. Then she smiled, predatory and determined. I'll make the calls. U.S. Attorney can accelerate the timeline. Grand jury proceedings within 48 hours. Indictments before the end of the week. What about Voss? Reed asked. What about him? Morrison's voice was cold. He's Cuba's problem now. Maybe Cuban intelligence gets some useful information. Maybe they don't. Either way, he spends the rest of his life in Havana watching everyone he betrayed go to prison without him. That's not justice, Cross said quietly. No, Morrison agreed. But it's the closest we're going to get. Sometimes you win the battle and lose a soldier. Question is whether the victory still matters. Sophia looked at Axel, still pressed against her side. Thought about Stevens, who died protecting evidence. About Pierce, crushed against a loading dock wall. About Marcus, whose career and freedom ended in a morgue because he'd chosen corruption over integrity. About the people still facing trial because she'd refused to stay silent. The victory matters, she said. And somehow, despite Voss's escape, despite the compromises and imperfect endings, she believed it. 3 days later, Sophia stood in a federal courtroom watching Marcus Webb enter in handcuffs and an orange jumpsuit that made him look smaller than she remembered. His attorney, some expensive defense lawyer who'd probably been hired by people with vested interests in keeping him quiet, walked beside him with the resigned expression of someone fighting a battle already lost. The gallery was packed. Journalists filled half the seats. Federal agents occupied another quarter. The rest were hospital staff from Mercy Ridge, nurses and doctors who'd worked alongside Marcus for years without knowing what he really was. Hendricks sat 3 rows behind Sophia. Their eyes met briefly. Hendricks nodded once, expression unreadable. The judge entered and everyone stood. Sophia felt Axel pressed against her leg. Cross had pulled strings to get the dog certified as her service animal for court appearances, and nobody questioned it after the media picked up on the hero combat dog, Angle. The arraignment proceeded with bureaucratic efficiency. Charges read aloud: conspiracy to commit murder, obstruction of justice, aiding and abetting weapons trafficking, federal corruption. Each one carried years of prison time. Together they added up to decades. Marcus's attorney entered a plea of not guilty. Standard procedure, but his voice lacked conviction. The prosecutor, a sharp-featured woman named Catherine Yates, who'd built her career on public corruption cases, presented evidence in clinical detail. Recorded conversations, financial transfers, Marcus's own confession captured on body camera footage, the gun he'd pointed at Sophia in the morgue, fingerprints still clear on the grip. The judge set bail at $5 million. Marcus's face went pale. His attorney didn't even argue. Remanded to federal custody pending trial, the judge said. Next appearance in 30 days. Guards led Marcus away. He looked back once as they reached the courtroom doors. His eyes found Sophia's and held there for a moment. Not apologetic, not defiant, just empty. The recognition that everything he'd built was gone and wouldn't be coming back. Then the doors closed and he disappeared. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Sophia had expected this. Cross and Morrison had warned her, prepared her for questions and cameras, and people shouting her name like she was someone important. "Miss Calloway, how does it feel seeing your colleague arrested? Do you think justice is being served? What message does this send about corruption in healthcare?" Cross and Morrison formed a protective barrier, keeping the press at arm's length. Sophia stopped at the microphone setup the U.S. Attorney's Office had arranged. Yates stood beside her, professional and composed. "I'll make a brief statement," Sophia said. Her voice sounded stronger than she felt. What happened at Mercy Ridge Hospital wasn't about one corrupt nurse or one misguided director. It was about a system that valued silence over accountability, that dismissed people who asked questions, that made witnesses feel invisible so they'd be easier to ignore. The cameras clicked and whirred. Reporters scribbled notes. "I spent 6 months being treated like I didn't belong at that hospital. Like my experience didn't matter, like I was too soft or too quiet or too whatever excuse people needed to dismiss me." Sophia paused, making sure the words landed clearly. But when the crisis came, when lives were at stake, all that experience they'd dismissed became the only thing that mattered. The military training, the operational knowledge, the ability to stay calm when everything was falling apart. A reporter shouted a question, but Sophia kept talking. "So here's what I want people to understand. When you make someone invisible, when you create an environment where certain voices don't get heard, you're not just being unkind, you're creating the conditions for corruption to thrive. Because the people who see problems, who notice inconsistencies, who ask uncomfortable questions, those are exactly the people abusive systems need to silence." She looked directly at the cameras now, speaking to everyone watching at home or reading transcripts later. "I'm testifying in these trials. All of them. Every defendant, every charge, because staying silent protects criminals, and I'm done protecting people who don't deserve protection." The questions erupted as she stepped away from the microphone. Cross and Morrison guided her toward a waiting SUV, Axel clearing a path through the crowd with his mere presence. Nobody wanted to get close to 70 pounds of scarred combat dog. Inside the vehicle, Sophia let out a breath she'd been holding for what felt like hours. "That was good," Morrison said. "Direct, clear, the kind of soundbite that plays well." "I wasn't thinking about soundbites." "I know. That's why it worked." Morrison checked her phone. "Social media is already running with it. Nurse who exposed corruption calls for accountability. You're trending. Sophia didn't know what to do with that information. Didn't know how to reconcile being furniture for 6 months with suddenly being someone people quoted and analyzed and used as an example. How long until the next hearing? She asked. 2 weeks. Grand jury for the Aegis executives. They're fighting the charges, claiming they were following orders from DOD officials who gave them criminal immunity. Cross drove with one hand, the other holding a phone where he was clearly reading something. It's not going to work. Yates has documentation proving they knew the shipments were illegal. What about the DOD officials? 3 have already pled guilty in exchange for cooperation. They're giving testimony against the senators and State Department contacts, building a case all the way up the chain. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Your testimony is key to establishing the historical pattern, showing this wasn't a recent operation but something systemic going back years. Sophia nodded, feeling exhaustion settling into her bones. The arraignment had taken 2 hours but felt like days. When does Reed testify? Next month. Doctors want him fully recovered first. He's got physical therapy scheduled, vocal cord repair where he took shrapnel. It's a long road. Morrison turned in her seat. But he's alive. That's what matters. And he's going to make damn sure everyone involved pays for trying to kill him. The safe house they took her to was different from the first one. Bigger, better secured, with armed guards visible on the property and security cameras covering every angle. Cross walked her through the setup while Morrison coordinated something over encrypted channels. You'll be here until the trial concludes, Cross explained. Could be 6 months. Could be longer if appeals drag out. That's a long time to be locked away. It's a long time to stay alive. His voice was matter of fact. Voss is in Cuba, but that doesn't mean he's powerless. He's got contacts who could arrange accidents, car crashes, home invasions, random violence that looks unconnected. Sophia sat down on the couch, Axel immediately pressing against her legs. So I hide until it's safe to exist again. You protect yourself until the people who'd hurt you are behind bars. Cross softened slightly. I know it's not ideal, but you're a federal witness in a case that's destroyed careers and exposed massive corruption. That makes you valuable and vulnerable in equal measure. I'm aware. Morrison entered the room holding a laptop. You need to see this. Patricia Hendricks just went on record with the local news station. Full interview. She's corroborating everything. She pulled up the video. Hendricks sat across from a reporter, looking tired but determined, and told the entire story. How she'd noticed Pierce behaving suspiciously, how Marcus had access to restricted areas, how she'd compiled evidence for weeks while trying to figure out who to trust. I watched Sophia Calloway get dismissed and ignored for 6 months, Hendricks said on screen. I participated in it. We all did. And when she turned out to be the person who saved lives and exposed corruption, I realized I'd been part of the problem. So I'm speaking up now, because silence protects the wrong people. The interview continued with Hendricks detailing specific incidents, conversations she'd overheard, documents she'd seen, moments that had seemed strange at the time but made sense now. She named names, referenced dates, gave investigators new leads to pursue. When it ended, Sophia felt something complicated in her chest. Not quite forgiveness, not quite gratitude. Something between the two that didn't have a name. She's taking a risk, Morrison said. Going public like that makes her a target too. She knows that. Sophia watched the screen even though the interview had ended. She's doing it anyway. Over the next 2 weeks, the dominoes fell with increasing speed. 2 more Aegis executives entered guilty pleas. A DOD procurement officer attempted suicide in his holding cell and survived, then agreed to full cooperation in exchange for psychiatric treatment instead of maximum security. One of the senators resigned under pressure and released a statement claiming he'd been misled about the weapons shipments, a defense nobody believed, but that would complicate his eventual trial. The media covered it relentlessly. Every day brought new revelations, new arrests, new details about how deep the corruption went. Sophia watched from the safe house, giving depositions to prosecutors and preparing for testimony while the world outside transformed her story into something larger than she recognized. Headlines called her a hero. Editorial pages debated what her experience said about workplace culture and whistleblower protection. Think pieces analyzed the psychology of organizational silence and how it enabled criminal behavior. Sophia mostly felt numb to it. The person they were writing about, the fearless nurse who'd exposed a military conspiracy, didn't feel like her. That person seemed braver, more certain, less tired. Reed called one evening while she was reviewing testimony notes. His voice sounded stronger than it had in the hospital, but still carried the rough edge of someone healing from trauma. "How are you holding up?" he asked. "Tired of being in protective custody. Tired of preparing for trials that keep getting delayed. Tired of watching people debate whether I'm a hero or a troublemaker." Sophia rubbed her eyes. "How's physical therapy?" "Painful. Progress is slow. Doctors say I'll make full recovery, but it's going to take months." He paused. "I saw Hendrix's interview. She's getting death threats." "I know, FBI's monitoring her phone and email. So far they're just threats. Nobody's acted on them." Yet, Sophia agreed. Silence hung between them for a moment. Then Reed said quietly, "I've been thinking about after this. When the trials are done and we've testified and the defendants are in prison, what comes next?" "I don't know. Haven't thought that far ahead." "You should, because this case is going to open doors, job offers, consulting positions, maybe teaching opportunities if you want them." His voice carried weight. "You could have a real career, not just surviving in obscurity, but actually using your skills in ways that matter." Sophia looked at Axel, sleeping beside the couch. The dog's legs twitched occasionally, dreaming about something, running or fighting or whatever combat dogs dreamed about when they finally felt safe. "I don't want to keep living in the world of classified operations and federal investigations," she said. "I left that life for reasons." "Then don't go back to it. Build something new. Something that uses your experience without consuming you." Reed sounded like he'd been thinking about this for a while. Medical consulting for veterans, training programs for combat medics transitioning to civilian healthcare, advocacy work for whistleblower protection. That's a lot of options. That's the point. You have choices now. You're not invisible anymore. You're not the nurse everyone dismissed. He paused. Question is what you do with that visibility. After they hung up, Sophia sat in the dark safe house, thinking about visibility and invisibility, about the cost of both, about spending 6 months wanting to be noticed and then achieving it in the most violent, public way possible. The grand jury proceedings happened in waves over the next month. Sophia testified 3 times, once for the Aegis executives, once for the DoD officials, once for the State Department contacts. Each time she walked through the same story: Istanbul, Viper, the trafficking patterns she'd recognized, the assault on the hospital, the evidence she'd recovered. Each time the grand jury returned indictments. The trials themselves began in September, 4 months after the hospital assault. The first defendant was an Aegis vice president named Robert Storch, who'd coordinated logistics for the illegal shipments. His defense strategy was to claim he'd been following orders from government officials who'd assured him everything was legal. Yates destroyed that defense in under an hour. She presented emails where Storch discussed concealing weapons in medical supply crates, financial records showing offshore payments that bypassed legitimate DoD accounting, testimony from warehouse workers who'd been ordered to mislabel cargo containers. And then she called Sophia to the stand. The courtroom was smaller than she'd expected, more intimate. Sophia sat in the witness box with her right hand raised, swearing to tell the truth, and felt the weight of everyone watching. The jury, the judge, Storch himself sitting beside his attorney with an expression that tried for innocent but landed closer to calculating. Yates approached with a folder full of documents. "Ms. Calloway, can you describe your military service?" Sophia went through it. The enlistment, the combat medic training, the deployment to classified operations under the Viper program. Yates walked her through each step carefully, establishing credibility, making sure the jury understood she wasn't just a nurse, but someone with expertise in covert military operations. "And during your time with Viper, did you observe anything unusual about supply shipments to your unit?" "Yes. Crates marked as medical supplies that were too heavy. Security protocols that exceeded what we'd normally see for medicine or equipment. Cargo manifests that didn't match the actual contents." Sophia kept her voice level. "People talked about it, but asking questions was discouraged." "Why was it discouraged?" "Because the people coordinating those shipments had authority we couldn't challenge, and because the consequences of asking questions tended to be career-ending. Or worse." Storch's attorney objected. The judge sustained it. Yates rephrased. Based on your training and experience, what did you believe those unusual shipments contained? Weapons, ammunition, equipment that wouldn't be documented in official logistics channels. Sophia looked directly at the jury. The kind of cargo you'd want to hide from oversight. The testimony continued for 2 hours. Yates presented the manifests Reed had hidden, walking Sophia through each document, asking her to identify patterns and explain what they meant. By the time she was done, the jury looked nauseous. Storch's attorney tried to discredit her during cross-examination, suggested she was motivated by grudges against military contractors, implied her memory of events 5 years ago couldn't be reliable, questioned whether someone who'd left active service could really understand current operations. Sophia answered each attack calmly. She'd been prepared for this. Yates had warned her, practiced with her, taught her how to maintain composure under hostile questioning. "I'm not here because I hate contractors," Sophia said at one point. "I'm here because I saw weapons trafficking disguised as humanitarian aid, saw it in Istanbul, saw evidence of it at Mercy Ridge Hospital, and refused to stay quiet about crimes that cost lives." The attorney tried to push back, but she'd already made her point. The jury was watching her with something that looked like belief. Storch was convicted 3 days later. All charges. 47 years in federal prison. The second trial was for 2 DoD officials who'd authorized the fraudulent shipments. They'd already pled guilty to some charges but fought others, hoping to reduce their sentences. Their strategy was to claim they'd been deceived by Aegis contractors and hadn't known the full scope of the operation. Reed's testimony destroyed that defense. He walked the jury through his investigation, the documents he'd found, the patterns he'd identified, the meetings where DoD officials had explicitly discussed concealing weapons shipments from congressional oversight. When the prosecutor asked if these officials could have been deceived, Reed looked directly at them and said, "They weren't victims. They were architects." Both defendants received 30-year sentences. The trials continued through fall and into winter. Senators, State Department officials, more Aegis executives. Some fought, some pled guilty. All of them lost. Sophia testified in 7 trials total. Each time she told the same story. Each time juries believed her. Each time defendants were convicted and sentenced to decades in prison. The media called it a watershed moment for military accountability. Legal scholars debated whether the prosecutions would change how DoD oversight functioned. Veterans groups issued statements supporting the convictions, while contractors' associations complained about overreach. Sophia stopped reading the coverage after a while. The debates felt distant from the actual work of testifying, of answering questions, of watching people go to prison for crimes they'd committed. The final trial concluded in January, 8 months after the hospital assault. The last defendant was a State Department undersecretary who'd coordinated diplomatic cover for the weapons shipments. He'd fought every charge, insisted on taking the stand himself, and spent 3 days trying to convince the jury he'd been following lawful orders. The jury deliberated for 6 hours and returned guilty verdicts on all counts. 52 years in federal prison. Outside the courthouse, reporters asked Sophia how it felt to see justice served. "It feels incomplete," she said honestly. "Martin Voss is still in Cuba. Other people involved probably escaped investigation. The system that enabled this corruption still exists." She paused. "But 14 people are in prison who weren't before. That matters. It's not perfect justice, but it's real justice. Sometimes that has to be enough." The protective custody ended 3 days later. Cross and Morrison drove her back to Seattle, to a new apartment the FBI had arranged in a building with good security and no connection to her previous life. Axel explored the space immediately, checking every room, ensuring it was safe. Then he settled on the couch, like he'd lived there forever. "What's next for you?" Morrison asked. Sophia looked around the empty apartment, at the boxes of belongings the FBI had moved from storage, at the life she needed to rebuild from scratch. "I don't know yet. People keep asking me that. Reed thinks I should do consulting or advocacy work. Yates mentioned teaching opportunities. Everyone seems certain I should do something important." "What do you want to do?" "I want to not be defined by one terrible night." Sophia sat down beside Axel, running her hands through his fur. "I want to figure out who I am when I'm not fighting for my life or testifying in trials." Cross nodded slowly. "That's fair. You've earned the right to just exist for a while." After they left, Sophia sat in the quiet apartment and tried to imagine what existing looked like. She'd been in survival mode for 8 months, hiding, testifying, preparing for the next trial. Before that, she'd been in hiding from her own past, trying to be invisible enough that nobody would ask questions. She didn't know how to just be visible without it being a crisis. Her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Sophia, it's Patricia Hendricks. Sophia sat up straighter. Hey, I hope it's okay that I called. Morrison gave me your number, said you were out of protective custody. Hendricks sounded nervous. I wanted to check if you're doing all right. I'm fine. Tired. Trying to figure out what normal looks like. Yeah, me too. Hendricks paused. I've been getting job offers, hospitals that want to hire me because of the publicity. They keep calling me a hero, which feels wrong considering I stayed silent for so long. You spoke up when it mattered. I spoke up after you made it impossible to stay silent. There's a difference. Hendricks's voice carried weight. I've been thinking about that a lot. About how many times I had chances to question things and didn't. How many times I chose comfort over courage. Sophia didn't know what to say to that. Didn't know if there was anything that would make Hendricks feel less guilty about choices already made. I'm starting a nonprofit, Hendricks said suddenly. Workplace accountability organization. Resources for healthcare workers who see problems but don't know how to report them safely. Legal support. Whistleblower protection. The kind of structure that should have existed at Mercy Ridge. That's ambitious. It's necessary. And I want to do it right, which means I need people with experience navigating corrupt systems. People who understand the cost of speaking up. She paused. I'm asking if you'd consider joining. Not right away. Not until you're ready. But eventually, when you figure out what comes next. Sophia looked at Axel, who was watching her with patient intensity. Thought about Reed's suggestion of advocacy work, about using her experience to help people instead of just surviving it. I'll think about it, she said. That's all I'm asking. Hendricks sounded relieved. Take care of yourself, Sophia. You've earned that. Over the next few weeks, Sophia started building something that resembled a life. She adopted Axel officially. Paperwork cleared through military channels with surprising speed, probably because someone high up decided the optics were good. She started therapy with a counselor who specialized in trauma survivors. She took long walks through Seattle neighborhoods, relearning how to exist in public without constantly watching for threats. Job offers came steadily. Medical consulting firms, veterans hospitals, private security companies wanting someone with her specific expertise. She turned them all down. Wasn't ready yet to commit to anything permanent. Instead, she started volunteering at a free clinic serving homeless veterans. Basic medical work, nothing complicated. But the people there knew about Istanbul and Viper because many of them had served in similar programs. They understood what she'd been through without her needing to explain. One afternoon in March, almost a year after the hospital assault, Reed showed up at the clinic. He was walking without assistance now, moving carefully but steadily. The scars on his neck were visible but fading. You're hard to track down, he said. That's intentional. Sophia finished bandaging a patient's leg and walked Reed outside to where food trucks lined the street. How did you find me? Morrison keeps tabs on people she considers assets. She mentioned you were doing volunteer work. He bought them both coffee from a nearby cart. I've been calling. You don't answer. I needed space from everything connected to the trials. I understand that. But I wanted to make sure you knew about something. Reed handed her a folder. DIA is creating a task force focused on military contracting oversight. Independent investigators with authority to audit shipments and interview personnel. Real accountability mechanisms with teeth. Sophia opened the folder, scanning the documents inside. Budget allocations. Personnel requirements. Mission parameters that looked legitimate rather than performative. They're naming it the Stevensvale Integrity Initiative, Reed continued, after the agent who died protecting me and the operation that exposed the corruption. It's permanent, funded through congressional appropriation, so it can't be quietly defunded when attention fades. That's good, Sophia said carefully. Overdue, but good. They want you to consult on the medical oversight component, help design protocols for identifying suspicious supply shipments, train investigators on what to look for. He paused. It's contract work, part-time. You'd have control over your schedule and involvement level. Sophia looked at the folder, then at Reed. Why me? Because you're the person who recognized the patterns everyone else missed, who understood how corruption works and refused to accept it as normal. His voice was quiet but certain. And because the people running this initiative want to do it right, which means they need someone who can't be bought or intimidated into looking the other way. She thought about that, about using her experience not to relive trauma, but to prevent it from happening to others, about building systems that functioned instead of just exposing ones that didn't. I'll think about it, she said finally. That's all I'm asking, Reed smiled. For what it's worth, I think you'd be good at it. Teaching people to see what others don't, that's a valuable skill. After he left, Sophia walked back into the clinic and spent the rest of the afternoon treating patients. Mundane medical work that felt important precisely because it wasn't dramatic or dangerous. Just people helping people without corruption or conspiracy complicating things. That evening, she sat in her apartment with Axel and opened her laptop. Started drafting an email to Hendricks about the nonprofit. Then opened the folder Reed had given her and read through the task force documentation more carefully. Both opportunities felt right in different ways. Both would use her experience without consuming her life. Both represented choices rather than reactions, active decisions about who she wanted to be instead of passive acceptance of whatever role people assigned her. She made a list, pros and cons, timeline considerations, how much energy she realistically had after a year of trials and testimony, what recovery looked like when you'd spent 8 months in survival mode. Then she closed the laptop and just sat with Axel in comfortable silence. The memorial service for Stevens happened in April at Arlington National Cemetery. Military honors, full ceremony, the kind of funeral reserved for people who died serving their country. Sophia attended along with Cross, Morrison, Reed, and what looked like half of DIA's operational personnel. Stevens' widow approached Sophia afterward. She was younger than expected, with kind eyes and a composure that probably came from military spouse training. "You're the nurse," she said. Not a question. "I am. I'm so sorry for your loss." "Don't be sorry. Be proud." Stevens's widow squeezed her hand. "My husband died protecting someone who exposed corruption that's been destroying lives for years. He believed what he was doing mattered. That makes his death mean something." The words should have felt comforting. Instead, they just felt heavy. "I'm not sure meaning makes loss hurt less," Sophia said quietly. "It doesn't, but it makes it bearable." The widow smiled sadly. "That's all we get sometimes, just bearable instead of unbearable." Sophia thought about that for weeks afterward, about loss and meaning and the difference between the two, about whether justice served could ever compensate for lives lost getting there. She didn't have answers, wasn't sure anyone did, but she kept moving forward anyway. In May, Sophia accepted both positions, part-time consulting for the Stevens Vale Initiative and advisory board membership for Hendricks' nonprofit. Neither consumed all her time. Neither became her entire identity. They were just pieces of a life she was building deliberately instead of defaulting into. The work felt good, useful, like she was channeling experience into something constructive rather than just carrying it as burden. Hendricks' nonprofit grew quickly. By summer, they had funding, office space, and a hotline for healthcare workers reporting institutional problems. Sophia helped design the intake protocols, taught volunteers how to recognize different types of workplace corruption, consulted on cases that involved military healthcare facilities. The Stevens Vale Initiative launched with bipartisan congressional support and real enforcement authority. Sophia spent 2 days a month training investigators, reviewing audit procedures, and helping design detection systems for trafficking patterns. The work was technical and unglamorous, and exactly what was needed to prevent future operations from functioning undetected. Reed sent her an article 6 months after the initiative launched. It profiled the task force's first major investigation, an Aegis subcontractor moving weapons through earthquake relief shipments. The scheme had been caught early, shut down before any illegal cargo moved, and resulted in immediate criminal charges. "Your protocols caught this," Reed wrote in the email. "You helped build a system that actually works." Sophia read the article twice, felt something warming in her chest that might have been satisfaction, or vindication, or just simple relief that the work mattered. She was learning to live with incomplete victories, with Voss still in Cuba and other criminals probably still operating, and systems that remained imperfect despite reform efforts. Justice wasn't a single dramatic moment where everything resolved cleanly. It was incremental progress and small wins and constant vigilance against people who'd always look for new ways to corrupt systems. That was okay. She could work with okay. One evening in late September, almost 18 months after the hospital assault, Sophia was walking Axel through a park near her apartment when she saw someone sitting on a bench reading a newspaper. It took her a second to recognize Hendricks, who was wearing civilian clothes and looked more relaxed than Sophia had ever seen her. "Hey," Sophia said, stopping. "You lost? Just taking a break?" Hendricks folded the newspaper. "Nonprofit work is exhausting. Turns out building accountability systems is harder than complaining about their absence." "Shocking, right?" Hendricks smiled. "How's the task force work?" "Good. Slow. We caught another contractor last month trying to move grenades and medical supply shipments. Whole operation shut down before anything crossed borders. That's what success looks like, I guess. Problems stopped before they become crises." Hendricks paused. "I've been thinking about that night at the hospital. How different things would have been if someone had caught Pierce earlier, if the systems had worked before we needed a combat assault to expose the corruption. Prevention is always better than reaction." "Yeah, which is why the work we're doing now matters, even if it's not dramatic." Hendricks looked at Axel, who was lying peacefully at Sophia's feet. "You seem good, better than the last time I saw you." "I am. It took a while. Therapy helped. Time helped. Actually, using my experience in constructive ways instead of just surviving it helped most." Sophia sat down on the bench. "I'm not going to say I'm grateful for what happened. The assault was traumatic. Stevens died. People got hurt. That's not okay, no matter how things turned out. But I'm not invisible anymore. And I learned I'm capable of things I didn't know I could do. That's worth something, even if I'd prefer to have learned it different ways." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the park slowly empty as evening approached. Sophia thought about all the versions of herself that had existed: the combat medic in Istanbul, the dismissed nurse at Mercy Ridge, the federal witness in protective custody, the consultant building accountability systems. All of them were her. None of them were complete on their own. "I heard the final appeals got denied," Hendricks said eventually. "Storch and the others. Supreme Court refused to hear the cases." "I heard that too." Sophia felt something settle. "Which means it's really over. No more trials, no more testimony, just people serving the sentences they earned." "How does that feel?" "Like closure. Not perfect, but real." She paused. "Like we actually won something that matters." Hendricks nodded. "We did. Because of you. Because you refused to stay quiet when staying quiet would have been easier. I stayed quiet for 6 months before that night. And then you didn't. That's what matters." Hendricks stood up. "I should get going, but I'm glad I ran into you. Glad you're doing okay." After she left, Sophia sat with Axel and watched the sun set over Seattle. Thought about visibility and invisibility, about the cost of both and the choice between them. She'd spent years trying to be invisible, trying to escape her past and build a quiet life where nobody asked questions and nothing dramatic happened. That life had felt safe in the moment, but hollow in retrospect. Then one night had forced her visible in the most violent way possible, and while she wouldn't choose to repeat the trauma, wouldn't wish that experience on anyone, she also couldn't pretend it hadn't changed her in ways that felt important. She'd learned she was stronger than she'd known, braver than she'd believed, capable of things that terrified her but needed doing anyway. And she'd learned that being dismissed and underestimated wasn't actually about her capabilities. It was about other people's need to feel superior by making someone else small. That was their problem, not hers. Her phone buzzed with the text from Reed, saw the news about the appeals, wanted to say congratulations. "You did good work. Changed lives. That matters more than people realize." Sophia typed back, "Thank you. For everything. For believing the evidence mattered enough to risk your life. For surviving when they tried to kill you. For helping build something better." 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, "We helped build something better. You, me, Morrison, Cross, Hendricks, Stevens, everyone who refused to accept corruption as normal. That's what actually changes things. Enough people deciding the system has to work. Sophia stared at the message for a long time. Then she wrote, "You're right. Thank you for reminding me I'm not doing this alone." She put the phone away and looked at Axel, who was watching her with patient intelligence. "What do you think?" she asked the dog. "Did we do okay?" Axel's tail thumped once against the ground. "Yeah," Sophia said quietly. "I think so too." She stood up and started walking home as streetlights flickered on across the city. Tomorrow she had a consulting session with the Stevens Vale Initiative. Next week she was training volunteers for Hendrick's nonprofit. The month after that, she'd volunteered to speak at a medical conference about accountability in military healthcare. Her calendar was full of commitments and choices and work that felt meaningful. Not because it was dramatic or heroic or the kind of thing people made movies about, just because it helped people and used her skills and made systems function slightly better than they had before. That was enough. More than enough, actually. Because Sophia Calloway had spent 6 months being invisible and 1 night proving she wasn't, had spent 8 months testifying and 18 months rebuilding, had learned that being dismissed wasn't permanent, that speaking up mattered even when it was terrifying, that one person refusing to stay silent could actually change things. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough to matter. And in the end, after all the trials and trauma and fighting for justice that felt incomplete but real, that was the truth she carried forward. You didn't have to be perfect to make a difference. Didn't have to be fearless to be brave. Didn't have to win every battle to win the war. You just had to refuse to stay silent when silence protected the wrong people. Everything else, the recognition, the vindication, the career opportunities, those were just bonuses. What actually mattered was the choice. The decision to be visible even when visibility was dangerous. To speak truth even when nobody wanted to hear it. To keep pushing for accountability even when systems resisted change. That was power, real power, the kind nobody could dismiss or diminish or take away. And Sophia Calloway, former combat medic, former invisible nurse, former federal witness, finally understood she'd had it all along. She just hadn't known she was allowed to use it. Now she knew better.